Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies. Thank you for joining Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. This is a conspiracy podcast unlike any other, simply because the others are not presented by us. That's right. I am Brent Lee.
And I'm Neil Sanders.
Before we get into it, I got a question for you, Neil.
Go on.
Out of all the musicians and bands who are alleged to either be in the Illuminati, or owned by the Illuminati, or sold their souls, who is your favorite Illuminati artist?
Oh, that's difficult. I like quite a lot. I like the Beach Boys, who used to knock around with Charles Manson, and I like the Cure a lot. And I've seen loads of people say that Robert Smith must be in the Illuminati because there's a picture of him holding his hand over his eye.
I've seen that. Yeah,
he's been staring us in the face all these years. Who isn't in the Illuminati then? I thought the point was that you had to sort of sell your soul to make anything. Is there anyone that isn't? Even these people that sort of claim to be sort of anti-Illuminati, like, I don't know, people like maybe Jedi mind tricks, Skinny Puppy, stuff like that. Like, wouldn't that just be the perfect cover?
Possibly. But I guess this might have been a coded question to find out who your favorite band was, and you've said it was the Beach Boys now.
Well, I love the Beach Boys. I absolutely adore. I know. I'm sat here wearing an Iskra t-shirt, which is a Canadian crust pop band.
Yeah, you try and be all punk.
Yeah, but I'm genuinely serious. I absolutely adore the Beach Boys. They're brilliant. They're absolutely great. Pet Sounds is the best album ever recorded. It pisses all over Sgt. Pepper's. It's amazing.
Nice.
What about you, Brent?
I don't know if I'll get cancelled for this one, but Kanye West is a genius. There's one thing I was quite upset about, to be fair. One thing I have in common with Nick Fuentes: an obsession with Kanye West.
Fair enough. Poor old Kanye.
But like you said, who isn't in the Illuminati if they're in the music industry?
Exactly. This is
All right, shall I introduce our guest?
Yes.
Yeah. Who have we got here today? All right, today we are joined by Dan, the Sarcastic Barman. Hi, Dan.
Good evening, gents. I'm not sure if I want to talk to you anymore, Brent, after you just said Kanye West is your favourite musical artist, because he's not an artist and he's really, really shit at music. So, yeah, that's very disappointing. You could have picked anyone else in the entire world.
You're cancelled.
I think what I admire about Kanye is he's taken that line between madness and genius and just run straight over it. Perhaps in the wrong direction.
I'm failing to see, though, where the genius is in Kanye West.
All right, then. What's yours? What's your favourite Illuminati musician?
Oh, Sam Ryder. Because let's be fair, he almost won Eurovision. And by the look of it, the UK is going to host Eurovision next year. And I like the song. And there's no way he didn't sell his soul to Satan to get those views on TikTok to then promote him to do Eurovision. Because, well, actually, I can't think of anyone else I'd rather have done the song. But he's got to, because he came second. So he definitely sold his soul.
Okay, fair point.
It makes sense.
To be fair, Brent looks a bit like Sam Ryder.
Hey, my mother-in-law says that. Yeah, so you've got a YouTube channel. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I've got my channel, The Sarcastic Barman. I look at the general stupid you find on the internet. Enjoy doing it on evolution, flat earthers, mud flood, the general sort of baseline conspiracy stuff that you don't have to go too deep into to look at it and go, that's really, really silly. Yeah, I work with a group called The Shills. There's Dick Dawson, AB Science. I can't remember anyone else right now because I've been drinking. But yeah, they're a great group. Some fun videos. Amy, if I don't mention Amy, she's going to stab me. But yeah, and they do a panel show Friday, Saturday nights. They're a good laugh. Sunday night they do a sort of a girls' one get together. Thursdays they've been doing dates on Ukraine, which I should mention because it's pushed them past 4,000 subs at the moment, which is really cool of them. And then I set up my channel for nice personal reasons, and it's all fun.
I started watching your stuff during COVID. I really enjoy it. I very much like this, the takedowns that you do of people like Natural Nurse and people like that. I think it's good to have some counter to like the absolute nonsense, isn't it?
She horrendously. Oh, I forgot to ask. Swearing? Yes, no.
Yes.
Good, because I'm definitely going to be doing major swearing. But she fucking boiled my piss and no fucking end, mate. Jesus Christ. She was one of the craziest, battiest bitches you will ever find on the internet. The sort of person who says, yeah, Botox is fine and I'm all good with that, but don't have a vaccine. The fuck is wrong with you, bitch? But yeah, she got major things. I think my video on her is one of my highest viewed ones with the most comments and, more importantly, the most dislikes because it really got battered by trolls and things on that.
Wow.
But videos about vaccines I love doing because the facts on them for the ingredients, things like that, are so easily to check and verify. And these people go, yeah, but it's got aluminium in it. Yeah, it does, but everything has aluminium. Yeah, but it's got this in it. Well, actually, it doesn't because we're not in the 1970s anymore. Well, it might have. Shut up. Jesus Christ.
So, are there any conspiracy theories at all, or anything that is considered conspiracies that you might entertain? Do you think that JFK was murdered by the mafia? Did we land on Paul McCartney? Was the moon replaced just before Sgt. Pepper's, etc.?
Well, considering you mentioned the Beatles, I love the conspiracy theory that Paul McCartney was replaced and the whole album cover was the funeral thing. I've never looked into it, but I love that as that sort of idea of a conspiracy that sort of fits with celebrities being replaced because they're expensive commodities for companies that would look for a way to keep making that money.
Like Petra, like they did with the dog on Blue Peter.
Yeah, they replaced the dog, yeah, loads. What's her name? Skater Boy singer.
Avril Lavigne.
That's the one.
Yeah, she's been cloned.
Well, not cloned, but replaced. And there's a couple of other musical artists that are replaced by either their backup dancers and things like that, the ones that look very similar to them, hence the sudden change in music style, artist direction and things like that. And I can see that as being a thing because you've got that fan base there ready. I've never looked into it because it's just one of those that I find is a fun little amusing one that go, yeah. When I was early teens, that sort of level, it was aliens, UFOs, crop circles. I had a big A4 binder folder full of landings, crop circle photos and everything like that. And then I had the internet. And then you go and check these things. You go, oh, hang on. Why are they using that same photo there as here? Right. What's the origin for this photo? And you find, that photo was debunked as a couple of guys in a field that did it with some boys. Like, well, that pisses on my bonfire. I still think there's aliens out there. Don't think they've come to Earth, but I still think there's aliens out there.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
This is the thing, isn't it? Like, it's what we're trying to do again with this is this podcast is to look at the source. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire theory is bunk or whatever. But as you say, you want to find the truth. And like, that's the problem at the minute is that we've got the internet. You've literally got computers in your pockets. And like, people tend to just be far more sort of believing of things that they just want to believe nowadays, which is weird, really.
Yeah, I want to believe Bigfoot.
I want to believe in Bigfoot too.
I could get behind Bigfoot.
No, you couldn't. They're massive, mate.
God's sake.
Sorry.
I do get worried, though, on the posts that you see on social media from people that are obviously, how to put this politely, fucking moronic that would require literally 2 seconds to check. You don't need to use Google. You can use other search engines, anything like that, and go through several different sources for the thing you're posting and find that it is bollocks. And it's the inability of people nowadays to do that reference checking. If you still have to go to the library to find these documents, you wouldn't just take the first book you picked up. You check 2 or 3 sources for it to make sure you're getting the information that you wanted, to make sure the information is correct. which I find is very lacking with a lot of basic conspiracies. The more in-depth ones where they actually do tie in certain events to each other, you go, yeah, you're onto something, but if you dig deep enough, you find it doesn't fade away, but it fades that sort of grey, and you're like, there's not enough there to support it. Hence, with like the JFK you brought up before, was he killed by someone else? The second shooter and things like that, your gun angles and things. Did they know beforehand? The one that is that sensitive subject that you don't want to bring up is, did the British government know about Pearl Harbor beforehand, tell the American government, and certain people in the American government kept that information back because they knew they had to have that war, but they also needed a reason to go to war. If they put the fleet out, the war never started and things would have changed. And the other one is the American number that you have to phone to get emergency help. Was there information about that was never put out because they wanted the ongoing effects, because they wanted to control the oil? So they're conspiracies that you can go, there's sort of that makey senseness in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the craziness comes out.
That's very fair. Like, I think that's the best way to look at things, to be quite honest. Like, always be suspicious of stuff, but follow it through. Look at the actual source material, and don't let the wish be the father of the thought. Like, which is, a lot of people tend to reach a bit, don't they? Some of them reach so much they're going to fall over.
We see that a lot more nowadays.
Yeah, which is ironic because, as I say, you've got the access to the information should you know how to do it. But I think one of the skills that I think a lot of people don't have, and this is going to make me sound like a bit of an arsehole, but you should always think about this, is writing an essay. Like, literally having 3 points for an argument and 3 points against an argument, and trying to bash it out to see which side you might agree with. Anyone could do it, but no one can do anything if you haven't been shown how to, can you?
And ironically, truthers bang on about problem, reaction, solution and say Hegelian dialect, but that's not even what it is. We should be employing a Hegelian dialectic to give answers to what it is we're questioning.
Or to take that a bit further is to go, okay, this probably we get the concept of problem, reaction, solution. Where did this information come from? Who gave us this information? Have they got an ulterior motive in spreading what might be considered a conspiracy theory? Like, again, you need to go back to the source a lot of the time.
Primary and secondary sources are one of the key things we learned about in history, GCSE and A-level, and looking at those sources and saying, right, person A has written this, we know he was alive at the time, but he wasn't at the site of event X. So he becomes a secondary source because he didn't eyewitness it, he's taken the information and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it does seem to be that a lot of conspiracies do rely on secondary sources, not primary sources, for the events and telling of the events, because they want that slight distinguishment. Now, eyewitness testimony is never perfect, and we can all agree on that. But it seems to be the idea of looking at sources has definitely been lost in the last 10 years or so of people going through things, and not just your conspiracy stuff, just anything in general that people will take, well, this news article said that.
Yes.
Yeah, but where's the news article got that information from? Well, they've got it from this Facebook post.
Yeah.
See, that's not a reliable source. You need to go through these. You look at the whole COVID thing over the last couple of years, and people are relying on people that have got no medical training or no relation to do this. And I spent so much time going through NHS websites, actual statistical websites, to get the figures, and they are the best source available to me as a lay person to go, yeah, these many people from this, these many people from that, blah, 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 blah. So this is the figures presented. And then you get another person going, well, no, it's twice that many people were harmed, or not that many people were. Where are your numbers? Oh, it's this Facebook post. Like, for fuck's sake, just have some integrity in your claim. And that is the most important thing that these people can do is to have integrity in their claim.
Absolutely, man. No, you're spot on. This is the point. Like, and again, this is especially why we do the format that we do this show in, to give the conspiracy theory a fair whack, but to actually examine the sources and to appraise the evidence. Because, as we've said before, everyone says question everything, so let's actually question everything.
What are we questioning tonight? No one actually told me. Also, I'm still waiting for my 10,000 Furbies that I've been promised for payment for this.
Neil hook you up.
Yeah, it's definitely on its way.
Good.
Today, we are discussing the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. We'll be going over the history later, so for now, let me just give a quick overview of what we're discussing. The World Economic Forum, or WEF, was founded by Klaus Schwab, a German-born engineer and economist. The World Economic Forum hosts conferences all around the world throughout the year, but its main event is hosted annually in the city of Davos, Switzerland. This annual conference is imaginatively called Davos, insert year here. So this year's conference was Davos 2022. The forum has spearheaded many initiatives that it hopes its members and elite attendees will implement in whatever capacity they can, be it through corporations, the manufacturing and technology industries, and governments. One of these initiatives is the Great Reset, and was published in a book written by Klaus Schwab at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. It spoke of ways for corporations and governments to move forward, both through and after the pandemic. As we spoke about in our previous episode on Bohemian Grove, conspiracy theories tend to orbit most elite gatherings. These conspiracy theories come from two places: suspicion or cynicism. And to be fair, those feelings are often warranted, but we should be wary to take it too far. So Neil, what does the Truth Movement claim the World Economic Forum and Great Reset is?
The Great Reset is the plan of the World Economic Forum, and the World Economic Forum is a shadowy group of elites who secretly run the world using puppet politicians, and they engineered, or at the very least, took advantage of the crises of COVID and global warming in order to destroy the economy, the Western world, and reset capitalism as we know it via green initiatives, which will ultimately implement a digital ID slave state communist world government where you will eat insects, own nothing, and be happy about it. And this theory also includes sinister rituals in strange garb, the Rothschilds, Nazis, and plans for world depopulation. I know. It's terrifying, isn't it?
When you list it like that, it sounds comical.
Well, it's not. It's just to be taken terribly seriously.
To me, that sounds like the New World Order.
It does sound a lot like the New World Order, doesn't it, basically? And
yeah, it sounds like the New World Order. It sounds a bit like Bilderberg conspiracies, CFR, Trilateral Commission, Bohemian Grove, I guess.
Touch of cultural Marxism.
Yeah. The Great Reset book sounds a little bit like Project for a New American Century.
Yes, very much so. I mean, in the theory, the book and certain other documents that have come out of the World Economic Forum, the book which was written by Klaus Schwab, that and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, these are seen within the theory as basically manifestos. These are the policies. These are literally what the World Economic Forum wants to achieve, laid out before you, brazenly, absolutely brazenly telling you that this is the future that they've got in store for you, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And that's where the theory comes from.
I've heard some bits about this because I thought, right, I've got to do some prep for today. I spent an entire hour, a whole hour of my life on YouTube trying to get more information about it, but trying to get the right sort of information. I thought, right, we'll start with Google, we'll find reading results and things like that. And the reading results are so all over the place and spotty here, spotty there, spotty there. It looks like a Jack Pollock fucking painting. It's fucking ridiculous. There's no sort of actual thing. So I thought, right, hang on. We found the actual World Economic Forum website. We'll go to there. That's just as fucking bad to find anything on that website. It's a fucking piece of trash. I went through and the video said, do you want to watch me again? I thought, I've never been to this website before. Why would I want to watch you again? I've not watched you once. Jesus Christ. So I was like, right, we'll go through some YouTube shit. And that made me fall off the bar stool laughing from the inconsistencies and all that. I was like, the actual fuck is going on? So I thought, you know what? I give up. I'm going to wait for you to tell me about it. The only thing I like from what I've heard is that you'll own nothing and be happy.
Oh, no.
Because the main thing is being happy. I'd be happy if I owned nothing and people gave me the shit to just be happy. I'm like, yay, I'm happy.
Well, that's been interpreted by the conspiracy, by the truth movement as you'll eat that and like it. It's not that you'll be in a state of happiness; it's that you'll have no alternative. Is where the theory lies. Well, let's dive in and see where it takes us, shall we? The first mention of the Great Reset as a conspiracy theory was on the 25th of June 2020 in an article in The Hill, which is an online news publication about politics. It was an essay by a guy called Justin Haskins, not the bloke from The Darkness, as we established, but the editorial director of the Heartlands Institute, which is a think tank connected to fossil fuels. Like a bit of foreshadowing there. Okay, so put a pin in that. Anywho, so Justin Haskins is very, very concerned about a recent Davos. Davos, by the way, is a place in Switzerland. It isn't the leader of the Daleks, as some people have probably misunderstood. You know Davos, the leader of the Daleks. Sorry to go off on one, but there was a show on Channel 4 listing famous bad guys, and Davos was on it. The show was hosted by Mad Frankie Fraser, and he described Davos fairly, I think, as an intergalactic slag. Now, I've never been able to find that footage, but if anyone can find that, I'll be your friend for life. Anyway, I digress. Justin Haskins, he's very, very worried because recently at Davos, there's been this concept that's been floated around called the Great Reset. And he says,
for decades, progressives have attempted to use climate change to justify liberal policy changes. But their latest attempt, a new proposal called the Great Reset, is the most ambitious and radical plan the world has seen in more than a generation. At a virtual meeting earlier in June, hosted by the World Economic Forum, some of the planet's most powerful business leaders, government officials, and activists announced a proposal to reset the global economy. Instead of traditional capitalism, the high-profile group said the world should adopt more socialist policies, such as wealth taxes, additional regulations, and massive Green New Deal-like government programs.
What he's referring to there is he's talking about the Green New Deal, which is a proposal made by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to basically make the world free of fossil fuels by 2030. Anyway,
Schwab also said that all aspects of our societies and economies must be revamped, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Although many details about the Great Reset won't be rolled out until the World Economic Forum meets in Davos in January 2021, the general principles of the plan are clear. The world needs massive new government programs and far-reaching policies comparable to those offered by American socialists such as Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in their Green New Deal plan. Or put another way, we need a form of socialism.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, this is terrifying, isn't it? Now, the World Economic Forum basically, according to Haskins, saw the crisis of COVID as an opportunity to implement change. And he also points out that basically this is a bit of an old trick, and that they're going to use the crises of climate change to also implement these changes, which ultimately will lead to a form of socialism in his eyes.
Prince Charles said, "The threat of climate change has been more gradual than COVID-19, but its devastating reality for many people and their livelihoods around the world, and its ever greater potential to disrupt, surpasses even that of COVID-19.
Now, Haskins is concerned about this, and he says,
Of course, these government officials, activists, and influencers can't impose a systemic change of this size on their own, which is why they have already started to activate vast networks of left-wing activists from around the world, who will, throughout 2021, demand changes in line with the Great Reset. According to the World Economic Forum, its 2021 Davos Summit will include thousands of members of the Global Shapers community, youth activists located in 400 cities across the planet. The Global Shapers program was involved in the widespread climate strikes of 2019, and more than 1,300 have already been trained by the Climate Reality Project, the highly influential, well-funded climate activist organization run by former Vice President Al Gore, who serves on the World Economic Forum's Board of Trustees.
And this is his major concern.
For those of us who support free markets, the Great Reset is nothing short of terrifying. Our current crony capitalist system has many flaws, to be sure, but granting more power to the government agents who created that crony system and eroding property rights is not the best way forward.
And that was the first time that anybody had ever heard of the Great Reset. When it first came out, the conspiracy theory, it needed a couple of hits because basically it fell in line with the George Floyd murder. And so the internet was more awash with the argument between people who think that it's not okay to kill people, just because of the colour of their skin, and people who thought that that was affront to free speech in some way. So it kind of got missed. The next time, and possibly the most influential initial explanation of the Great Reset actually came in November of 2020 when Laura Ingraham on Fox News did an expose piece explaining how this was going to change your lives forever.
But your idea of normal isn't what the global elites have in mind on the other side of this pandemic. And they don't like that old normal where Americans enjoyed their freedoms and the freedoms we often take for granted, like the right to work, to run a business, to attend school, the right to travel, and so on. Because for them, individual liberty must always be sacrificed for the greater global good. And since last spring, powerful people began to use this pandemic as a way to try to force radical social and economic change across the continents.
She then quotes Bernard Looney, the BP CEO.
Any recovery stimulus should have green conditions attached to it. Secondly, energy prices should reflect real costs. And building back better ought to be about closing the gaps that exist in inequality and social injustice rather than widening them.
And she points out that a few politicians have used this phrase recently, building back better, including Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. And she says that essentially that phrase came from the World Economic Forum. It's part of their Great Reset. They are attempting to build back better. But what she's saying is that their idea of better is not your idea of better. It's going to be a world that's going to benefit them under the guise of this global good, essentially.
Well, your individual rights are always going to take a back seat to promoting the values of global health and harmony. Strategies for fighting COVID, just like strategies for fighting poverty or climate change, should all follow the same path, no deviation among nations. Well, to accomplish this, Schwab laid out a couple of big goals. Fairer outcomes by coordination in tax, regulatory, trade, and fiscal policy. And it all may include changes to wealth taxes, the withdrawal of fossil fuel subsidies, and new rules governing intellectual property, trade, and competition. And transitioning, of course, from fossil fuels to green energy.
And basically she says this is essentially Biden's agenda.
It's basically Biden's agenda. When Biden said we're going to work with our allies, what he really means is he's going to let them have veto power over our trade initiatives, our patent and trademark laws, and our energy industry. And that's just a start.
And she suggests that this is basically the plot. And then she shows Bill Gates discussing the potential need for vaccine passports.
Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control.
And she talks about essentially the need for mandatory vaccines and implies that it's all part of the same plot, that the Great Reset is going to build back better, but ultimately it's going to reduce all of your individual rights, from copyright law to being able to choose where you want to work. And Biden's completely on board with this, because essentially this is the plot, to mechanize people through mandatory vaccines, mandatory digital IDs showing that you've had these vaccines. And this is apparently all contained in the manifesto of the World Economic Forum, which is called the Great Reset. The next time that we heard about, or the next prominent person to speak about the Great Reset, was a journalist, in inverted commas, called James Dellingpole. And James Dellingpole has worked for The Times, The Telegraph, The Mail, The Spectator, and Breitbart. And he actually appeared on the Alan Jones show, which is a Sky News Australia television show. And Alan starts off by saying,
Trump created 7 million new jobs. But these successes sit uncomfortably with outfits like the World Economic Forum, whose ranks include people like Prince Charles and Al Gore and that schoolgirl. They're all there. George Soros, Greenpeace, the President of the European Bank, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the World Economic Forum. Remember it. The Great Reset. 3 big words. To quote, make society fairer, smarter and greener, and to get humanity off the road to climate catastrophe. Make the world work with nature rather than exploit the natural world. If businesses start to prioritise nature, that could add 395 million new jobs globally by 2030. Make no mistake, the left are in the ascendant.
So he thinks that these things are somehow indicative of something bad. The idea that they want to avert the climate catastrophe, they want to work with nature rather than exploit the world, and they want to add new jobs by 2030. I think he believes that this is a bit of a smokescreen. And to enlighten us on why this is a smokescreen, he's brought on James Dellingpole, who for some reason he starts by saying,
he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth.
Now, I'm not quite sure why that's relevant, or even if it's accurate. Well, I do know if it's accurate, but I don't wish to spoil it. So we'll come back to that in a bit. Dellingpole goes straight for the jugular.
Why are they doing this? And the answer is quite simply, this is a coup by the globalist elite. These guys are very serious about their plan, which ultimately is to reduce us to the status of serfs, which, of course, elites have done throughout the ages. I mean, welcome to 2030. I own nothing, I have no privacy, and life has never been better. Well, it doesn't sound like a better life to me. It sounds horrible.
And what he's referring to there is an article that was put out by the World Economic Forum by a lady called Ida Auken, which was titled, Welcome to 2030, I own nothing, I have no privacy, and life has never been better. And he takes umbrage with this because he basically, him and a few other people, that say, well, I want to own property, and I don't accept that. I don't accept that I will be forced to be happy in these conditions, because they've taken that as, you know, like when your mum used to say, you'll eat your dinner and you like it. And you wouldn't like it, you'd hate it. But you'd have to pretend to like it to avoid slippering or whatever. I'm showing how old I am there. But yes, apparently this is the plan of the World Economic Forum, that you won't have any things. And you'll just have to put up with that. You'll like it or lump it, essentially. And then Alan comes back and says,
you'll have no money, no private property, no democracy. Every key decision, and what you do for a living, how much stuff you consume, as you've said, will be decided by a remote, unaccountable elite.
And then he goes on to say that Justin Trudeau has said that the pandemic gives us an opportunity for a great reset. And that's true. Justin Trudeau had made this speech saying that basically the pandemic has given us a chance for a great reset, completely aping the language of the Great Reset. Now, going on, another article between the pair of them on the same channel, Sky News. See if you can see what they're alluding to in the title of this. The Great Reset, globalists using the virus to destroy the old world order. Ooh. So, what comes after the old world order? Well, it's exactly the new world order, or potentially a courtesy new world order until the new world order arrives, and then you could...
A mid-world order.
Yes, exactly. But James Dellingpole goes on this. He says, anyone who doesn't realise that the Great Reset is the biggest threat to our way of life right now, they haven't been paying attention. And he implies that the pandemic was actually planned by the World Economic Forum. And this is based on two things. In 2017, the World Economic Forum got a group together called CEPI, CEPI.
Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations.
Thank you very much. That's exactly what. So they started this in 2017, and this included funding from governments, but actually also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were heavily involved in this, and they're very well into sort of vaccination and say epidemic preparedness. Now, a bit of a coincidence that a mere few years later, there's a world epidemic, and they're at the forefront of this. And how are they at the forefront of this? Through Event 201. Now, Event 201 was almost like a sort of war game scenario. It was an imagined respiratory SARS-like illness that actually came from pigs, but basically it shut down the world. And this was in October of 2019, and a lot of people have suggested that the scenario that they sort of imagineered in this war game very, very closely sort of matched what actually ended up happening. And a lot of people have seen this as evidence that they had either foreknowledge or that they were prepping people in order to accept things like lockdowns that were actually about to unfold on the world. I'm sure you guys have seen stuff about Event 201.
Yeah, and it also like harkens back to a lot of drills before certain conspiracies.
Yes, or even the idea of a drill going live halfway through.
I do feel like, and I know where the chat is going and things, that no matter what had happened or things beforehand, that conspiracy theorists would still find things to tie this to. Because if the whole COVID thing had happened 20 years ago, they'd be tying it to the movie Outbreak.
Absolutely.
If it had happened 10 years ago, they'd be tying it to something else. They would always seem to be something to tie it to. There's always something, if you look and go through every government's planning and every document and things like that, there's always something there that, that ties to this, that ties to that. It's like, well, yeah, because governments are supposed to be prepared for this. But do they get to the point of over-preparedness that they know it's going to happen? And that's when the conspiracy stuff comes in. And that's what makes it fun to look into.
Absolutely, absolutely. But Dellingpole takes that a step further. He implies that basically this is solid gold sort of evidence, or he heavily implies it. He basically says that this is evidence that they knew what was coming, and maybe even engineered it in order to implement this terrible system that they want. And he says that when you hear the phrase "build back better," I've heard it from Boris Johnson, I've heard it from Biden. This is a code phrase for the great reset of our lives, because their belief is that the old world is broken. And they are talking about us not owning property anymore. We won't own anything. This is a takeover by the technocrats. And he doubles down. He says, I urge anyone that thinks this is a conspiracy theory to do a bit of background reading. The Great Reset, combined with UN Agenda 2030, is a complete transformation of our society on lines that I would call communist or fascist. I mean, frankly, what's the difference? We'll come back to that in a bit. Anywho, he then promotes his podcast with Mike Eden, on which they say that the government is lying about the pandemic, and he says that essentially the pandemic is over. This was in October 2020, by the way. And by this time, according to Mike Eden, we'd all achieved herd immunity. We'll come back to that later in the programme as to whether that was true or not. So, terrifying, isn't it, this Great Reset? They're certainly laying it out. It seems to be some sort of New World Order type takeover, and there doesn't seem to be an awful lot that we can do about it. So thank heavens for all these plucky reporters for bringing it up.
So far, it sounds scary. If they're right, it sounds scary.
It certainly does sound scary, doesn't it? And apparently, as to say, what they keep pointing out is that it's all laid out. They're not shy about this. It's all in the books. It's all on the talks and stuff like that. This isn't a conspiracy theory, as James Dellingpole has pointed out. It's something that you could go and find out that will be ushering in commie fascism.
A lot of these reporters and things like that are reporting from an American point of view. They think the NHS is communist.
They do.
Yep.
So I feel like a lot of the points being raised are going to be like, communism, social housing, free food for the poor people. How dare you? Because the people in charge have got far more money than they can wipe their ass with $10 bills and not care.
It might be that. I mean, again, I don't wish to spoil anything.
Definitely no spoilers.
But there's certainly a vibe of that floating around there. Yeah, there's a garnish of that in the air, isn't there? So the next person that and I don't know whether this feeds into that notion, but the next person that I saw talking about this was Candace Owens speaking with Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Now, there's going to be certain connections with the people that promote this theory. See if you can spot them.
Take a look at the World Economic Forum. You know, the person that heads it up is a man named Klaus Schwab. He released a book in 2020 talking about how the COVID pandemic represented an opportunity for them to transform the world, for them to abolish private property. I look at the situation and I say, what we're seeing is a modernized system of slavery. This is slavery in 2022, and they are proliferating this under the guise of COVID-19. They want a system of slavery, and I cannot say this enough. People, look it up.
So again, she's suggesting that essentially the pandemic has been overplayed, or at the very least that these people have taken advantage of it. And what they want to do is they want to transform society. They essentially want to introduce this slave state where you will own nothing. One of the main cruxes of the theory. She says, its stated objective, the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset's stated objective is that by 2030, you will own nothing. And then on Twitter, just about the same time that this actual interview came out, and if anyone's been listening to our previous podcast, this might sound rather familiar. She says that they are using COVID to crash the Western economy and implement communist policies. Which obviously, again, is absolutely terrifying. It's anathema to everything that we in the wise West take as granted, really. And there's various things that are sort of attached to this as well that basically support what she's saying. There's a website called the BL that said, the Great Reset is a globalist communist agenda. Why? Because it aims to create a great state at the global level commanded by large multinational corporations. And now, we will come back to this, but I just want to read that again, right? Okay. The Great Reset is a globalist communist agenda. Why? Because it aims to create a great state at the global level commanded by large multinational corporations.
That's
10 points if you can spot the error in that one, but we'll come back to that.
I'm screaming internally here so often it's unreal.
Anywho, let's be fair. The corporations involved in the World Economic Forum that are desperate to impose this communist superstate are the well-known companies such as Microsoft, Amazon, and the big banks.
Oh, fucking hell.
And again, basically, people like Sky News host Corey Bernardi says that the Great Reset is socialism on a global scale. And again, all these people basically cite, Trudeau's use of the phrase "the Great Reset" as evidence that he's essentially an acolyte to this communist world system. So, are you convinced yet, Dan?
No. It's more amusing when the two people that you've quoted for their comments have net worths of over $1 million, and it's like, oh, no. Yeah, you are part of the global fucking elite. I'm sat here with less than £2,000 in my bank account thinking, how am I going to pay the next electric bill? You're there thinking, how am I going to get someone to polish my toenails and wax my butt crack next? Thanks for that. Who's the elite? Not fucking me. It's fucking you. Fuckers. They're fucking fuckers. I know there's elites above those elites, but...
Well, I don't wish to spoil anything, Dan, but you might be rather astute with that comment there. But again, we'll come on to that in a little while. The next person that really got their dander up about the Great Reset was Glenn Beck. And Glenn Beck appeared on the Dave Rubin show, and the show was called Why the Great Reset is No Longer a Conspiracy. And they point out that the first and most important thing that they point out on this is that Klaus Schwab looks a bit like the Emperor from Star Wars.
Fucking hell.
If that's the angle that they're going to do. And they're referring to this. There's a very strange picture of Klaus Schwab in sort of leather garb. He looks like he's in a sort of heavy metal video or something. And this is the picture that they're talking about. He's got sort of like a triangle breastplate and big sort of like shoulder pads like Grace Jones might wear. And it's all sort of like leathery and like, you know, so it's like Grace Jones does Judas Priest, essentially.
Yeah, it's a bit like a baddie on Star Trek.
Very much like a baddie on Star Trek or, you know, something like that. He looks a bit like Davos.
Does he sit about in a wheelchair all day scheming?
It's more insidious than we thought, Dan. Right, anyway. So, Glenn Beck goes on. He points out...
The scariest to me is Soros. He has, believe it or not, kind of the least to do with the actual verbiage in the book, but he is the guy who started the WEF with Klaus Schwab. Klaus is the guy who is really pushing it, but without Soros, there wouldn't be a place to push it, and without Soros, it wouldn't be being pushed. He is a huge force. The other one is Joe Biden, who has bought into this 100% and is on the road to transform not just America, but the entire Western world in ways that will affect your life that you can't even imagine yet. Everything is about to change. How I eat, how I dress, what I say, how I pick my job. Do I get to pick my job? My kids in school, they're going to be fast-tracked. Will they get to pick their own career? Everything is changing.
He also says that ESG scores are because of the Great Reset, and he applies that ESG scores will be applied to people in the future. Now, what an ESG score is like environmental social governance score. And it's a suggested rating for businesses to basically show how environmentally conscious they are, how sort of damaging they are to the social strata around them, and how much their governance, which is essentially their policies and how they run their company, is tied into being environmentally sound and looking after workers and stuff like that.
So is this like a health and safety rating that you get outside like pubs and restaurants and such?
It's not dissimilar to that, but it's based on sort of carbon footprint and measures that you're taking to reduce that, and looking at cleaner energy and how you handle your waste and things like that. But it's a suggested thing. It's not like a sort of universally adopted thing. It is a rating system that some businesses are applying as sort of it's a way to make them more attractive to shareholders and stuff like that. But he implies that this is because of the Great Reset, and that sooner or later this will be applied to people too. And he says in China, there's a device that's on your phone. He says that in China, you have to have your phone on you at all times. It's illegal not to have your phone on you, and your phone is essentially your ID card, and it's tied to everything. And in China, Glenn Beck says they have a social credit system, and basically if you're considered a wrong 'un, like you're considered anti-authoritarian or against the state or a free thinker or one of these people that doesn't subscribe to this woke shit, like then basically this can affect your social credit. And he says in China, if you're not allowed out if your social credit goes below a certain level. And if you do go out, it'll start to alert people around you. And it creates this forced isolation by basically, if they come close to you, their credit rating starts to drop, and so they will be punished for it. And he says that this is exactly the system that George Soros and the World Economic Forum is desperate to implement. And the way that they're going to do this is through the vaccine passports, which he says that Bill Gates is absolutely cuckoo for and thinks is the best plan since sliced bread. But Glenn has a method to fight the Great Reset. He says that the best way to fight the Great Reset is to ban ESG scores for companies. That's it. That's what he says. That's the best way to stop this attack on our liberties, our attack to sort of own property.
Is that because it's like a gateway drug to this credit system?
Yes, that's potentially what it is, because I suppose if you don't have them for companies, you won't have them for people.
Okay.
I mean, I would say right now it is certainly strange, particularly the way that he's described this, that he thinks that this is the mechanism to stop it. The next person, oh, good God. The next person that spoke about the Great Reset was Paul Joseph Watson. The first time that he mentioned it, he was talking about being forced to eat insects. He said that the Great Reset is about enacting a drastic reduction in living standards for the plebs, which will force them to put bugs, weeds, and sewage on the menu, whilst the Davos elite continue to feast on the finest cuisine. That sounds horrible, doesn't it?
It does. What I would say, though, at an elite restaurant, you would probably have that stuff on your plate.
I don't know. Maybe not the sewage.
I don't know. Heston Blumenthal.
Yeah, Heston Blumenthal.
Here's one I can offer for my years in chefing and things like that. That a lot of the big dishes that you see nowadays on menus, so your stroganoffs and things like that, traditionally made with the cheap cuts because they were peasant dishes. And yet they're the dishes you go out and say, oh, steak stroganoff on the menu with a nice rice and the sauce and things like that. They're cheap dishes because you cook them all day. They're the things you take the time over because you cook them all day, because you're in work all day. Not because the cuts are cheap. Yes, they're cheap. But because you put one in the morning, you fuck off to work and you come back 8, 9, 10 hours later and it's ready as a meal to eat as a sort of stewy broth. And you go, yeah, oh, this is lovely. The meat's so tender. Yeah, because it's cooked 12 hours.
That's a fair point. But in his defence, like, Paul Joseph Watson has not always been the most judicious of people. Well, like recently a recording came out, I'm sure we can find it, where he suggested that if there was a button where he could remove Jews from the planet, that he might do that. I don't know whether that taints your sort of opinion of whether he's, got all his shit together. But anyway, let's give him a fair whack. A fair whack. Anyway, so the Great Reset, mastermind Klaus Schwab, suggests a number of draconian measures for controlling the population under the umbrella of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, including risk assessment, brain scans to cross borders, and implantable chips to read people's thoughts. Now, to explain what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is, Klaus Schwab says, and it's not just him, it's a thing, it's an established thing. The next industrial revolution will be a mechanization of AI and robots and remote learning and things like that, computer learning. And we've already started to see it like in stuff like, say, Teams meetings. That's remote, the use of technology in order to negate the need for an office. We see things like Alexa, say, or chatbots. And this is an extension of the Third Industrial Revolution, which was basically robots and mechanization in factories and stuff like that.
And stuff like this.
Yes, it is very much stuff like this that we're recording this on now. A few years ago, this platform wouldn't exist. This is the stuff. If you explain this to a person in the 80s, they'd put you away, Brent. Like, it's madness. Like, because of this acceleration in technology, the suggestion is that sooner or later, a lot of jobs are going to become obsolete, and there's various ways that this could go. This is the concern of Paul Joseph Watson, apparently.
The flip side of it is certain things like this in 2019, you'd go, yeah, that seems reasonable in the next 8 or 9 years. And then certain events happened that accelerated the development of things like this and changed the working from home environment.
No, you've absolutely nailed it, mate, because that is essentially the excuse, according to all these people in the theory, said that all of these things were happening anyway, but COVID gave them the opportunity to accelerate these things. And that's why they think that they basically either hyped up COVID or very much invented it and sort of invented the lockdowns and all of these things so that this technological advancement could sort of go galloping forward. And the point that their theory is trying to make is that basically all of these things that seem to be sort of nice and helping us out in crisis are actually the sort of carrot before the stick of this takeover of communism, where basically if you can convince somebody to say work from home for the sake of a pandemic, you can convince people to give up all their possessions and start eating insects just to save the planet. And this is basically what Paul Joseph Watson is concerned about. And he says, Great Reset isn't just about restructuring the economic system, implementing a Green New Deal, making more jobs automated and lowering energy consumption and living standards. There's also a policing aspect to the agenda. He quotes from a book. He says, as capabilities in this area improve, the temptation for law enforcement agencies and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, assess guilt, or even possibly retrieve memories directly from people's brains will increase. And that's taken from one of Klaus Schwab's books, and Paul Joseph Watson is trying to imply that this is essentially part of the policy of the Great Reset, that this is what they want, implantable brain chips, being able to scan your memories to see if you've done any crimes in the past. And he's very, very worried about that.
I feel like the technology for scannable brain chips, scan your memories is... I like my sci-fi stuff, and I like looking at things that are saying, oh, they're pushing the envelope of sci-fi with this new invention. And I go, well, it's not really though, is it? And then you see the odd bits that are, they go, oh, NASA's developed a warp bubble. And I think I saw that about 5 years ago, saying, you're a shit article. And you still go through all this shit and you go, nothing there is even thinking of scanning people's brains, because even the crazy people know, yeah, you're not getting that far yet. I mean, maybe they are, but no.
It's all hidden in Area 51, Dan.
Well, I want to know, if that's in Area 51, what the fuck's in Area 52?
I believe it's a car park.
Oh, okay.
to service. It's got a shuttle bus that goes to Area 51. You know the thing that gets me about Area 51, right, okay, that no one ever seems to pick up? It implies that there's at least another 50 areas that are equally as secret. Like, where are they?
No, you're missing the more important one. Area 51 is apparently this secure, super secretive thing that everyone fucking knows about. So, really, it's not super secretive and things like that. Everyone knows that the flights take off from Vegas and go to the airport for the commercial workers, that people drive in through entrance X along highway, whatever. And you go, yes. So we know everyone who's going in. We know everyone who's flying in. That's not super secretive. The more super secretive thing is who's working in the secret base in Antarctica just along Charles Point or whatever like that. I can't remember the area. In this area that is just like, yeah, no one goes there and no one's allowed to go there. And then that reflects on the flat earth shit. And then it's all crazy. And then everyone takes drugs. And then we have that big orgy. Oh, wait, I'm thinking of the wrong party, aren't I?
Not necessarily, Dan. Let's see how it goes.
I don't find either of you attractive. It's fine.
So Paul Joseph Watson, and he's talking about the book here, he says, he also makes it clear that implantable microchips will be the cornerstone of a transhumanist agenda that will merge man with machine. He says that today's external devices, from wearable computers to VR headsets, will almost certainly become implantable in our bodies and brains. And active implantable microchips that break the skin barrier will change how we interface with the world and force us to question what it means to be human. And so they show that as evidence of a transhumanist agenda, that basically part of this great reset is to, mechanize people through digitizing IDs and implantable microchips, apparently. The other thing that a lot of people are concerned about is passage in the book that talks about airports and saying that perhaps the airports will have to be empty and perhaps planes will have to be reduced in their capacity, and the IDs and stuff that you might need in the future to get on these planes. So that is something else that people are very concerned about.
I love the idea of microchip.
What, in the back of the hand or something to pay for stuff?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I am the most useless person when it comes to remembering to take out my bank card, ID, passport, anything like that. My car keys, half the time I can never find my car keys or my phone. The idea of having that stuff implanted in microchip in my hand for ID and bank access, I find absolutely amazing. I interviewed a person on one of my shows. God, we're going back 18 months, 2 years ago now. And he's a very tattooed gentleman working like that, the Circus of Freaks sort of idea. And when people asked for his business card, he said, hold out your phone, put on your near communication stuff, and moved his hand over the phone because he had a microchip in it, which the phone then picked up and held that information then for, there's my website, that'll take you to that, sorted. And I think that's a brilliant idea, and I love the idea of it, but only as an optional idea. I'd be the first person to play Blue Murder if someone said, oh, you have to have it, it's the law. As an optional idea, though, I think it's fucking brilliant. If there's someone on my street corner who's offering it now to have my bank details and things in a card in my hand, I'd fucking do it.
Well, according to people like Paul Joseph Watson, you won't have to wait too long. So the final person that we looked at is Ben Shapiro, and he put out a video called Why You Need to Care About Klaus Schwab and the WEF. And he points out that although he himself, Ben Shapiro, is elite, but he makes the distinction that he's elite, but the World Economic Forum are elitists, and they want to rule the world and tell you how to live. This is Ben Shapiro, who thinks that if you're not religious, you're going to go to hell, and if you're gay, you're definitely going to go to hell, and he won't even go to your wedding because he thinks it's a sin. He's worried about elitists wanting to tell you how to live. Anywho, we'll come back to that. He says that basically capitalism, as it is amazing, and he says that it's evolved over time, and it's obviously the best system because it's the system that we've got, and it shouldn't be changed. But that the World Economic Forum wants to completely remake the system. He shows this clip of Klaus Schwab, and he points out that he's got a very thick German accent, almost like a Bond villain, and he mimics it in a way that some people might see as a bit sort of racist. But he basically says that Klaus Schwab says that the future is being built by us. And then he sort of highlights this by looking into the camera and putting on the accent of Klaus Schwab and going, you will obey. And so, oh, bloody hell. Klaus Schwab says that a better economy is possible. We need to reimagine capitalism to do it. And Shapiro says that by reimagining capitalism, he means that he should pick the winners and the losers, and he should be able to dictate the rules of the game. And Shapiro says, capitalism is not a system that was designed. It's a system that arose over the course of centuries to allow people to keep the fruits of their own labour and then freely trade their own labours. So, capitalism just sort of developed, it matured like a fine wine. It developed over time because that's obviously good. Anywho, he says his big concern is that the World Economic Forum promotes stakeholder capitalism. And he says that stakeholders basically mean Klaus Schwab's friends. Now, to explain what stakeholder capitalism is, it's basically shareholder capitalism is a system whereby you are beholden to the shareholders and the direction that the shareholders want to do, and you're all about profit. Stakeholder capitalism is a system whereby you are concerned about all sorts of other things, like the impact that your company has on the environment, or how well you treat your employees. And the idea is that through stakeholder capitalism, you actually sort of get a better result and a better profit by caring about these things. So the best analogy that I've come up with this is, as in all things in life, best analogy is to be taken from television programs about drug dealers. So shareholder capitalism is very much like The Wire. Now, I don't know whether you've seen The Wire, but they're drug dealers in Baltimore, and they basically roll upon a corner and they say, this is ours now. We don't care about who lives here, and if you try and oppose us, we'll kill you. And basically, we're all about the profit, and that's all that they're bothered about. Now, there's an Italian TV drama about drug dealers called Gomorrah, which is set in Naples. They show what stakeholder capitalism is. They roll upon an estate and walk around and tell everybody, we're going to start selling drugs here. But in exchange for that, you will get some money. We will tidy up the area. We will make sure that no crime happens in the area. And we will only do our drug dealing over there. And we'll make sure that there's no needles around. There's nothing. You won't know about it. You will be better off for it so long as you allow us to deal our drugs. Now, what you might notice in both of those systems is that the people still get to deal their drugs. It's just that one has good PR, which is stakeholder capitalism, and one is solely based on the concept of making profit for that company, and to hell with everybody else. We're going to be using that analogy throughout the show, and we'll come back to that. Shapiro says that free market capitalism means that there's no rulers, that there's no one person at the top, that free market capitalism is the freest system because, you know, anybody has the opportunity to rise to the top of the capitalistic system. And he also says that it is absurd to suggest that capitalism creates inequality in society or behind all the cause of climate change. I'm just going to repeat that and see if anyone notices the flaw. Shapiro says that it is absurd to suggest that capitalism creates inequality. Anyway, Klaus Schwab says we need stakeholder capitalism metrics, not financial metrics. Disclosures should be added to companies' annual reporting, making it possible to measure their progress over time. Doing so might include asking questions such as, what is the gender pay gap inside your company? How many people of diverse backgrounds were hired? How many people were promoted? What progress has been made to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? How much did the company pay in taxes globally? What did the company do to hire and train employees? And so this is basically what Klaus Schwab is advocating as the system of stakeholder capitalism. And again, Shapiro interprets this as top-down control. He says that the World Economic Forum wants to curtail free speech, and he shows a clip of Julie Inman Grant talking about the internet and the right to free speech versus the right not to be harassed online. And she basically says we need to recalibrate some human rights. And you know, on its own, that is very, very sinister. But his main takeaway is that capitalism is great and that stakeholder capitalism is somehow some sort of terrible, terrible control system over the entire planet. There's just a few more. One of the things that people are worried about is this concept of the young global leaders. There's a quote where Klaus Schwab says that he's going to be able to penetrate the governments. And he's being interviewed by David Gergen.
I know this name.
Nobody's picked up on that.
Yeah.
We know it. We've listened to our last show. David Gergen is the person that went to Bohemian Grove. He's the person that was ambushed by Alex Jones in the famous Have You Ever Done the Ritual interview. So this is a Bohemian Grover interviewing Klaus Schwab. Now, another thing about Klaus Schwab that is rumoured is that he's a member of the Bilderberg Group. So not only is this the World Economic Forum, but it's essentially a Bilderberg member being interviewed by a Bohemian Club member. And he says, there are two countries where the young global leaders have emerged. Tell us about that in terms of the governance. And he says, yes, this notion to integrate young leaders is part of the World Economic Forum since many years. I have to say, when I mention our names like Miss Merkel and even Vladimir Putin and so on, they have all been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. What we're very proud of is the young generation like Prime Minister Trudeau or the President of Argentina and so on. So we penetrate the cabinets. Yesterday, I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of the cabinet, or more than half, are young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. The thing that they're concerned about there is they're saying that we penetrate the cabinets. And what young global leaders are people who are sort of inducted, according to the theory, inducted into the World Economic Forum, almost like shock troops that are sent out there and almost seeded into political office in order to give a favour to the World Economic Forum and to spread its Great Reset philosophy. And so he says, so we penetrate the cabinets. And he points out that Prime Minister Trudeau and Vladimir Putin were these young global leaders. So that is something that people are quite concerned about. Another thing that people are concerned about is the idea that Klaus Schwab is a Satanist. And this is based on three things. One, the thing that we discussed earlier, the sort of freaky Cenobite costume that he seems to be wearing for no good reason. Two, the fact that Build Back Better is 3 Bs, and some have interpreted this as a coded 666 because a B is very much like a 6. Furthermore, the World Economic Forum, the logo has a sort of curve going through all the circles, so there are 3 circles with tails going off them, which also could be considered a symbolic 666.
Wow.
Furthermore, and worse than that, according to some people, is the suggestion that Klaus Schwab might be a Rothschild. You see, his mother, Marion Schwab, who fled to the USA in 1939, her maiden name is Rothschild, and she's the daughter of a banker named Louis Rothschild. And a lot of people are very, very concerned about that. The other thing that they're concerned about is that his father was a Nazi who ran the company Escher Weiss, and they used slave labor to produce flamethrowers and other equipment for Nazi Germany. And some people have interpreted this as basically genetic evil. And this is proof that obviously the Great Reset is some sort of commie Nazi takeover.
Oh God! No, sorry. I've literally been broken by the idea of a communist Nazi.
Well, you know, that's how insidious this plot is. Like, they'll go to any lengths.
That is literally wetting my pants because the ideas are so opposite.
Does that make him a lizard?
A Nazi lizard?
Well, he might be a lizard. I don't think it's been confirmed, but it would fit. It would fit a Nazi communist.
Nazi communist Rothschild lizard.
Exactly. But what a lot of people are also concerned about is that there seems to be photos of Klaus Schwab wandering around in lingerie on the beaches of Florida with his lad out, looking very, very strange and like he just sort of stepped out of some sex party. And have you seen it, Brent?
Yeah, I've seen that. Have you seen that before?
I have. It's come up on other things, and it's still like, yeah. I couldn't say it wasn't him or it was him because the resemblance is too uncanny. But at the same point, I don't care. He's not a member of parliament. He's just someone with a lot of money who works for an economic group thing that says, here are ideas. Why don't you look at our ideas and go, yeah, no, because you wear suspenders. Or, yeah, they're good ideas. Or, no, you're bald. I don't like your ideas. I don't like ideas from people who don't have hair. I don't care. It's take the ideas for the idea's worth, really. But, meh. I wouldn't walk out looking like that. I mean, I don't have the body for it at, what is he, 74, something like that? If my stomach was as flat then as, well, it's not now, but still.
We've actually bothered to find out whether it is him. And, we're going to leave that, I know marketing. Like, we're going to tease you for a little bit, but it will be revealed, like, in due course, I promise. One of the main quotes that's been bandied about, this is apparently from the Great Reset book. It says, at least 4 billion useless eaters shall be eliminated by the year 2050 by means of limited wars, organised epidemics of fatal, fast-acting diseases and starvation. Energy, food and water shall be kept at subsistent levels for the non-elites, starting with the white population of Western Europe and USA before spreading to other races. The population of Canada, Western Europe and USA will be decimated more rapidly than other continents until the world's population reaches a manageable level of 1 billion, of which 500 million will consist of Chinese and Japanese races selected because they are people who've been regimented for centuries and who are accustomed to obeying authority without question. And that's apparently in the Great Reset book. And we need to be terrified about that.
Okay, so that was the Great Reset conspiracy theory presented in full by the proponents of the conspiracy. Now it's time to discover what exactly the truth is in this theory. Please flip the record over to side B for part 2. And welcome back to part 2 of our World Economic Forum Great Reset Conspiracy Theory episode. We laid out the claims from multiple sources in part 1, and here in part 2 it's time to dig into this theory. Before we start, unfortunately during the recording Dan had to step away for an emergency and he wasn't able to return. He was a fun guest, so hopefully we'll have him on again in the future. Anyway, let's get into it.
I think I can take it that you're not massively impressed by the Great Reset theory. And I understand that, because here's a weird thing, right? You know what? Everybody's talking about the Great Reset at the minute. It's like the conspiracy theory du jour. Every single person that I've asked to explain to me what the Great Reset is, not a single person can actually give me a reasonable explanation. It's all nebulous. It's all basically based on, well, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And let's just start with that. That was an interview that came from Ida Auken. Like, that came out in 2016.
Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, all these things became free, so it ended up not making sense for us to own much. First, communication became digitized and free to everyone. Then, when clean energy became free, things started to move quickly. Transportation dropped dramatically in price. It made no sense for us to own cars anymore, because we would call a driverless vehicle or a flying car for longer journeys within minutes. We started transporting ourselves in a much more organised and coordinated way when public transport became easier, quicker and more convenient than the car. Now I can hardly believe that we accepted congestion and traffic jams, not to mention the air pollution from combustion engines. What were we thinking? Sometimes I use my bike when I go to see my friends. I enjoy the exercise and the ride. It kind of gets the soul to come along on the journey. Funny how some things never seem to lose their excitement. Walking, biking, cooking, drawing and growing plants. It makes perfect sense and reminds us of how our culture emerged out of a close relationship with nature. In our city, we don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we do not need it. My living room is used for business meetings when I am not there. Once in a while, I will choose to cook for myself. It is easy. The necessary kitchen equipment is delivered at my door within minutes. Since transport became free, we stopped having all these things stuffed into our home. Why keep a pasta maker and a crepe cooker crammed into our cupboards? We can just order them when we need them. This also made the breakthrough of the circular economy easier. When products are turned into services, no one has an interest in things with a short lifespan. Everything is designed for durability, repairability, and recyclability. The materials are flowing more quickly in our economy and can be transformed to new products pretty easily. Environmental problems seem far away since we only use clean energy and clean production methods. The air is clean, the water is clean, and nobody would dare to touch the protected areas of nature because they constitute such value to our well-being. In the cities, we have plenty of green space and plants and trees all over. I still do not understand why in the past we filled all free spots in the city with concrete. Shopping? I can barely remember what that is. For most of us, it has been turned into choosing things to use. Sometimes I find this fun, and sometimes I just want the algorithm to do it for me. It knows my taste better than I do now. When AI and robots took over so much of our work, we suddenly had time to eat well, sleep well, and spend time with other people. The concept of rush hour makes no sense anymore, since the work that we do can be done at any time. I don't really know if I would call it work anymore. It is more like thinking time, creation time, and development time. For a while, everything was turned into entertainment and people did not want to bother themselves with difficult issues. It was only at the last minute that we found out how to use all these new technologies for better purposes than just killing time. My biggest concern is all the people who do not live in our city. Those we lost on the way. Those who decided that it became too much, all this technology. Those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs. Those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kinds of lives outside of the city. Some have formed small, self-supplying communities. Others just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in the small 19th century villages. Once in a while, I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy, nowhere I can go and not be registered. I know that somewhere everything I do, think, and dream of is recorded. I just hope that nobody will use it against me. All in all, it is a good life. Much better than the path we were on, where it became so clear that we could not continue with the same model of growth. We had all these terrible things happening. Lifestyle diseases, climate change, the refugee crisis, environmental degradation, completely congested cities, water pollution, air pollution, social unrest and unemployment. We lost way too many people before we realised that we could do things differently.
It's very, very strange that was sort of brought up in 2020. Now, this might be something to do with the fact that in 2019, Auken publicly denounced Donald Trump on the internet as being an idiot for not knowing anything about windmills and green issues. So it may well be that basically people were just sort of gunning for her. Now, it's going to become very, very clear when you actually listen to this that it's not a policy document. It's her thinking about certain things. And now, what's important about Ida is that she's involved with a charity that is heavily, heavily invested in reusing clothes. That what it does is it basically wants to sort of almost recycle clothes so that they can be used for poorer people. And so that the clothes can become sustainable. And so that basically you get rid of all the sort of pollution that goes about that, and you also do a good deed. And I think this has heavily, heavily influenced her. One of the main points why you don't own anything is because everything is so plentiful that you get it for free. You get a new one free every day. Whatever you want, you get it free. So people have interpreted it as, you'll eat that, you'll be happy. And what it means is you will be happy. In her imagined future, this has satisfied people to the point where basically the concept of going out and buying aspirational goods and stuff like that is just silly because you can get them sent to you for free. So it's been vastly, vastly misinterpreted by people. Now, there are aspects of it that even she points out are not very good, like the surveillance aspect of it and the lack of privacy. She says these are really, really bad things. But, and I'm going to repeat this because it's important, it's not a real thing. It's a fucking story, right? People that are repeating you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, as if it's actually real, are the same people that leave Iron Maiden concerts halfway through because they think they're supposed to run to the hills, right? It's not an instruction. It's just some words, right? The important thing about this essay, which is, again, is just, it's like saying to a child, imagine the future with like flying cars and stuff, write about it. What do you think it might be like? It's literally like that.
Yeah, it's basically science fiction or social fiction.
Precisely. But there's no mechanism explaining how it'll get to that. It's not a policy of the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum doesn't really have policies, to be quite honest. It has sort of ideas. But this is the crux of where the majority of the theories come from. It's come from this Ida Auken 2016 essay. Now, just to give some background, as Brent said earlier, it was formed in 1971, the World Economic Forum by Schwab, right? And here's where one of the problems with the World Economic Forum starts off, because he pretends that, I spoke to my dad, right? Yeah, and I was like, I wanted to go into business because he's a big businessman and all my family are big businessmen. And yeah, amazing. But I wanted to serve the planet. I wanted to, give something back and be good. So he put on the World Economic Forum, which was originally called the European Management Forum. And he did this with a loan from a wealthy sort of Swiss businessman. The bloke said, all right, but if I don't get my money back, you have to come and work for me because I know that you're good at management, so I want you to come and work for me for 3 years. He'd still get paid, but basically he'd get a job out of it. And here's the bit where this is the real problem with the World Economic Forum, which we'll come onto later, but I want this to be seeded. He said he put on the first World Economic Forum, which was called the European Management Forum. And luckily enough, he made enough money from it to pay back the loan and to put on another forum. And at that point, you start to go, but I thought you were supposed to be serving people. And what the World Economic Forum really does is basically it's a sort of self-perpetuating think tank that's funded by about 1,000 company members. Typically, these companies have an annual turnover of about $5 billion. So it's very, very elite. The membership fees increase as participation in meetings, projects, and initiatives like rise. And basically, for example, in 2011, admission to one event was £19,000 per person. It's £52,000 to be an individual member. It's $263,000 for an industry partner, or it's $527,000 for us to be a strategic partner, and that was in 2011. And that basically denotes how much access you get to other people and their initiatives and their sort of people. Basically, to explain what the YGLs are, these are people that basically consider to be sort of like movers and shakers and like-minded people. They nominate 800 a year. But it's been sort of represented that these are people that are sort of, say, again, acolytes of the system. These are people that want praising. And I don't think that's completely accurate. We're going to come on to it a little bit more in just a second. But essentially, there's 800 people that are nominated each year.
That's a lot.
It is a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, you can look at that one of two ways. Either, dear Christ, they're everywhere, or alternatively, it's not quite as special as it might at first seem. They also have the global shapers. Now, there's more of these. These are basically activist groups that are set up in various cities around the world that just look to sort of get involved in sort of like, initiatives that are seen to be positive. They have a sort of general sort of manifesto, but it's sort of just sort of do-gooders and, activism and stuff like that. Now, The thing is, right, to go on to the YGL, right, okay, they're seen as sort of like shock troops, basically. It was founded in like 1993 as the Global Leaders for Tomorrow, which sounds even more mental. But they changed it to the Young Global Leaders in 2004. So there's 800 people chosen a year. And basically, once you've been chosen, you're an alumni for 5 years. So you're just like on their website. But a YGL, a Young Global Leader, can attend one World Economic Forum meeting for free. So they can go to one, and the rest of them, they have to pay. Now, the thing is, there's loads of people. Tulsi Gabbard, Peter Buttigieg, Andrew Scheer, who's a conservative Canadian, Emmanuel Macron, Alexander De Croo, who's the Prime Minister of Belgium, Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Maria Bartiromo, who's on Fox News, Michael Schumacher, Wycliffe Jean, Rio Ferdinand, and Roger Federer are all considered young global leaders. Yeah, so it's quite an eclectic crowd. It's like, you know, it's
I see what you did there.
It's a bit like you know, it's a bit like a nightclub in London, I suppose. Like,
you did realise Wyclef had an album called Eclectic, right?
No, I didn't. No, I actually didn't.
I thought you had. I thought, wow, Neil was so clever. That was a brilliant pun.
Oh, well, then, yes, I did. Absolutely, of course I did. No, I didn't. I wish I did. But there's loads of different people that go there. There's like, it's a bit of a sort of misnomer, this concept that, like, you know, if you've been involved with the World Economic Forum, you're immediately sort of tainted, because Donald Trump has been at the World Economic Forum, not just once, but twice, hasn't he, Brent?
He has.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, to the stage.
Thank you, Klaus, very much. It's a privilege to be here at this forum where leaders in business, science, art, diplomacy, and world affairs have gathered for many, many years to discuss how we can advance prosperity, security, and peace.
Gentlemen, let's press the pause button because the president's here now. Approaching the podium right now, being introduced by Klaus Schwab, who is the head of the World Economic Forum again. Donald Trump taking the stage here in Davos.
Congratulations on your 50th year hosting the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, a truly amazing achievement. It's an honor to address the distinguished members of this organization for the second time as president. We have so many great leaders in this room, not only business leaders, but leaders of nations. And some are doing such a fantastic job. We work together very closely. We will draw strength from the glories of the past, and we will make greatness our common mission for the future. Together, we will make our nations stronger, our countries safer, our culture richer, our people freer, and the world more beautiful than ever before.
Anywho, now the problem with the young global leaders and this concept that they're basically acolytes, right, okay, is that basically Daniel Crenshaw, who's a really hardline Republican that is actually opposed to the World Economic Forum, is a young global leader. And he said that basically he had no sort of say in the matter. He was just nominated. It's a bit like, it was a XXL, it was Source, wasn't it? Source magazine, what was it, like Unsigned Hype, right? It's a bit like that. The World Economic Forum puts out a list every year of 800 people that they think are sort of movers and shakers and that might be beneficial for them. But it works both ways, right? Okay, it's one of these. If you imagine the World Economic Forum as a nightclub, right? Okay, I want to get Kanye West and Leonardo DiCaprio in my nightclub because it makes my nightclub look
Kanye.
Good. Absolutely, like in his big shoes or whatever. You want all these people there because it basically gives your institution credibility. Now, as that institution gets bigger and bigger, as your nightclub gets more popular, celebrities want to be seen in that nightclub because that basically leads them to meet other celebrities in there. They get in the newspapers, they meet other movers and shakers. And that is exactly how the World Economic Forum functions. But this idea that it's not really as organised as people think it is in that sense. There's a lady called Michelle Rempel, and she's a Canadian conservative, and she was selected as a young global leader in 2016. So she went to Davos, and she wrote this article called "I Went to Davos, and the World Economic Forum is not run in Canada." When she initially got the email, she thought it was spam. She thought it was a joke, and so she checked up on it and went, yeah, all right, I'll go and get an Airbnb and go to this thing. And she described it as basically a bit like a business conference. She said the World Economic Forum could best be described as a left-to-centre think tank and lobbying facilitator. Companies who pay sizable fees to World Economic Forum meetings seemingly get access to members from other industries, key thought leaders and policy influencers from around the world. In return, the World Economic Forum gets the prestige of hosting these types of events. For thought leaders and influencers, World Economic Forum meetings and access to its broader community can serve as a way to diversify one's knowledge in many different fields. LinkedIn for the C-suite, but in person. And she says that the World Economic Forum is certainly elitist, but to my eyes, it fell far short of being a cabal bent on global domination. She says that where conspiracy theorists are correct to note that the World Economic Forum is elite and opaque in nature, it literally builds itself as an elite club. But rather, they are wrong to assume that as a legislator in Canada, I could be influenced in all matters simply by attending a conference, receiving an award, or reading a badly conceived white paper. And she points out that although Trudeau has used the language, if you want, of the Great Reset, she said, because she's annoyed about this conspiracy theory, because she gets accused of being a member of the World Economic Forum, because she's been. And she says that Justin Trudeau didn't help matters. But my observation of Trudeau in policy interviews is that rather than exhibiting a depth of knowledge on a subject, he tends to repeat whatever fashionable buzzword that's circulating. I took his reset comment at the UN not as a mark that an evil supervillain had got to him, but rather a suggestion that he knew the language of the World Economic Forum and wanted to invite back to the Davos party scene or help with a high-profile post-political gig. So in the same way that say Kanye might shout out that nightclub to get put on the guest list, Trudeau is basically using the language of the World Economic Forum because he realizes that this is where he's going to get an incredibly lucrative job, not necessarily because he's part of this cabal that wants to change and shape the world. Now, in looking at the theories, and I don't wish to sort of like come across as completely negative, but no. But anyway, in regards to the Great Reset theory, one thing that I've completely understood is that anybody that mentions the Great Reset theory and ties it back to either you will own nothing and you'll be happy, or that it's going to be a world communist state, or that basically they're advocating no property, or in fact any of the things that are involved in the Great Reset conspiracy theory, they haven't actually bothered to read the book The Great Reset. Because none of the things that they say are in the book, right? The book is written at a time where basically we're in a pandemic, we're in lockdown, and we've got social distancing, and they haven't got a vaccine. And so he's musing and he's wondering. He's talking about what ifs. He's talking about, will this happen? Will that happen? And to give you some tasters from the book, which I actually bothered to sit down and read, and it's incredibly dull. It's really, really dull because there's no policy, there's no mechanism to make policy, there's no ideal other than sort of like really, really basic things like we should do good things because good things are good. And we'll come on to why they want to do that in a bit. But basically what it says in the book is stuff like historically pandemics have initiated social change. Like this gives us an opportunity. The broader point is this: the possibilities for change and the resulting new order are now unlimited and are only bound by our imagination. For better or for worse, societies could be poised to become either more egalitarian or more authoritarian, or geared towards more solidarity or more individualism, favouring the interests of the few or the many. Economies, when they recover, could take the path of more inclusivity and be more attuned to the needs of global commons, or they could return to functioning as they did before. You get the point. We should take advantage of of this unprecedented opportunity to reimagine our world in a bid to make a better and more resilient one as it emerges on the other side of the crisis. And then what he does is he basically discusses all these things and says, oh, what if this happens? Well, yeah, that might happen. Oh, what if this happens? Oh, that might happen. And he goes on about stuff like saying, what history has shown is that previous epidemics exploit trade routes, and maybe these sorts of things will be affected. We've seen that AI and chatbots and stuff like that have risen in their usage. The pandemic has highlighted disparities in wealth. Now, he gets a lot of stuff wrong. He says stuff like COVID will ultimately increase the size of government, but they'll be more focused on helping people. Well, that didn't bloody work, did it? Like, that's certainly not what's happened in the UK. He makes a point about things like the little people, health workers, will ultimately be appreciated after the pandemic. And, you know, maybe they'll get a better wage, and maybe they'll be seen as the important cog in society that they are. None of that happened. Not a bit of that actually happened. He suggests making healthcare systems better and improving the scope of welfare and giving a better sick leave to workers. The destruction of the natural habitat leads to rise in zoonotic diseases, that pollution and air quality had an impact on COVID deaths, that we have a chance to invest in green policies that also create jobs. The fourth industrial revolution is inevitable, and the pandemic sped this up, but you can actually create jobs in this industry rather than letting people go to waste. He warns of the dystopia caused by mass surveillance, and he says that the pandemic made things worse. I'll tell you what the Great Reset and his Fourth Industrial Revolution books are like. They're like conversations that you have on pills at 4 a.m, right? They're literally like, oh, what if everyone had rocket packs? Oh, that'd be ace, because we could fly around, wouldn't it? Yeah, but you'd have to, like, stop yourself from looking at girls getting changed through windows. Yeah, that is true. What if people all had webbed feet? Well, I suppose we'd all need different shoes, but we could swim to work. And that is literally what it is. There's no policy, there's no mechanism. It's just him talking bollocks for hundreds of pages and saying, well, this could happen and this could happen. And really, ultimately, what all of these books are about is about very, very subtly suggesting, well, if this happens, here's a business opportunity. And if this happens, here's a business opportunity. And say if we had rocket packs, who could build the rocket packs? And that is literally what the books are about. And I feel that they've been massively, massively misrepresented, mostly because nobody's going to actually bother to read them. So essentially you're taking secondhand advice, which is exactly what Dan was saying at the beginning, like, you know, about, you know, sources and secondhand sources. Now, there's something that we need to make very, very clear, right, okay, from the start. Justin Haskins, who is the first person that brought up the Great Reset, he is the editorial director of the Heartlands Institute. And the Heartlands Institute is a fossil fuel think tank. They're basically, they push fossil fuels, and they are heavily involved in shareholder capitalism. Like, by definition, they are the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry. They are not interested in placating the public. They're not interested in pandering to green levies or paying wealth tax or any of that sort of stuff. Can you believe that a lot of what he says is just really nonsense? Like, I mean, the first thing that he does is basically saying, oh, this, for decades, progressives have tried to attempt to use climate change to justify liberal policy changes. And the World Economic Forum is trying to implement massive Green New Deal-like government programs. And this is an obvious attempt first to smear the Democrats and to tie any green policies in the World Economic Forum. Now, the World Economic Forum pay lip service to environmental concerns. But there's a lot of companies that are involved in the World Economic Forum, like Saudi Aramco, Chevron Oil, BP, Shell. These companies are not interested in green policies. They might give the impression that they're interested in green policies, but they really aren't. Okay, and so this might start to sort of twig where this is going. Like, there's also massive corporations like Amazon, Microsoft, and Coca-Cola and Unilever, and all of these massive corporations involved. So the idea that they want to actually tax themselves pills. Why would they do that? Well, it goes back to what we were saying about the sort of drug dealers. Okay, who's got the better PR? Where would you rather live? Near to the corner on the wire or on that estate in Gomorrah? You'd live on that estate in Gomorrah because at the very least they give lip service to paying attention. But they're not doing, are they? What they're doing is they're actually still flooding the streets with drugs. They're still making the profit. It's just that they are more palatable to the people who are affected by their need to gain profit. Right, so then he goes on to basically say, Schwab said that all aspects of our societies and economies must be revamped, from education to social contracts and working conditions. And this is actually something that he does say in the Great Reset, because it's basically, he said that the pandemic showed that low-paid workers are actually vital to keep things going. And also, because of the sort of digital revolution, this means less commuting. And he does talk about the potential risk of job losses in the fourth industrial revolution. And so that is essentially what he's saying. But again, it's mischaracterized as a plan rather than just somebody saying, this is an obvious thing that's coming down the road. It's like blaming the weatherman for making it rain. When he goes on to say that many details of the Great Reset won't be rolled out until they meet in Davos, but the general principles of the plan are clear. The world needs massive new government programs and far-reaching policies comparable to those offered by socialists. Or put another way, we need a new form of socialism. This is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. Right? Okay, there's no plan, there's no policy, there's no mechanism to make any of these things work. And also, the World Economic Forum has no direct power over government. It offers no plan for the green agenda. It just says, yeah, we should probably do this. It's a bit like my mates, right? Okay, my mate's shed is fucking full of just rubbish, right? Okay, they're never going to clean it. Okay, they're never going to clean it. But once in a while, my mate says, we should probably do the shed this weekend. You know why? Because that makes him look a slightly less lazy bastard and slightly more responsible as an adult than the sort of person that would just ignore that shed. And so in the same way, this is basically all that the World Economic Forum is doing. As I say, BP, Microsoft, Deloitte, the International Monetary Fund are part of this, right? It's a PR move. That's what the Great Reset is. It's a PR move, and we'll come on to discuss this. This is why it's dangerous, because it is attractive. If you've got two companies, right, okay, one that says, I don't give a fuck about you, I'm all about profit, and another one that says, no, wait, no, save the dolphins, right, okay, which one are you going to go for, right, okay? The one of those is immediately more palatable, more attractive, more likely to give you good press off the back of it. And so that is essentially what the problem with the Great Reset is. And this is exactly why you're getting people like the Heartlands Institute saying this, because the Heartlands Institute don't want to do that. And they're like other magicians who are getting cross at Penn and Teller, because basically they've got this mechanism to show like how we're going to sort of sweep in and do this. And it's all bullshit. It's all nonsense, but it could be effective. And he says, Prince Charles said the threat of climate change has been more gradual than COVID, blah, 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 as if this is an indication that people take this seriously. Nobody's listened to a word that Prince Charles said since he described himself as a tampon in Camilla Parker Bowles' snatch, right? Okay. And even then, we really didn't want to hear it.
For fuck's sake.
I know, it's obscene. Basically, the whole point of what he's saying is he's trying to frame, Haskins is trying to frame climate concerns, terrorism, right? So when he's saying like they've got all these youth activists located in 400 cities in the Global Shapers program. They're in more than 1,300 have already been trained by the Climate Reality Project. And this, again, is because essentially it comes from the oil industry. And so even the vaguest idea that they're going to look at climate concern. The point being, it's essentially it's easier to pretend that there's nothing right, and dismiss the entire thing as rubbish, because then we're not even getting to the conversation about what they might have to do with it. And as I say, the oil industry don't tend to want to do anything about this. But here's the thing, right, where he totally does himself. For those who support free markets, the Great Reset is nothing short of terrifying. Our current crony capitalist system has many flaws, but granting more power to government agents that created that crony capitalist system and eroding property rights is not the best way forward. First off, there's absolutely nothing in the Great Reset about property rights. What they're doing there is referring to that 2016 essay, which is nothing to do with policy of the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum, I will repeat, has no direct influence over politicians. We will come on to why it's a problem later. We're not naive, don't panic.
I've got a question.
Yes.
So this guy from the Heartland Institute, and you said the Heartland Institute work with petroleum companies?
Yes, they're a fossil fuel think tank.
Have any of those been to the World Economic Forum?
Some have, yeah.
Or are they members?
Yes, some are, like Saudi Aramco and Chevron and BP and Shell. But the Heartlands Institute represents a different aspect of that. They're more in tune with the Atlas Network, which is connected to people like the Kochs and the Mercers and the Heritage Foundation. The Mercers and people like that are hedge fund managers. And again, they're not actually, here's the strange thing, they're not actually opposed to the World Economic Forum in theory. It's really more the stakeholder capitalism, because they don't want to have to go through the effort of trying to appear nice. And all these other companies, fake though it is, have got this plan, this plot. And so they want to undermine that. Why? We'll come on to that in a bit. Well, no, so you just let's explain it now. It's because of the lobbying power. It's because of the lobbying power of the people connected to the World Economic Forum. Why doesn't Justin Haskins of the Heartlands Institute just come out and say the problem with the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum is lobbying? Because he does exactly the same thing. Because all of the people connected to him do exactly the same thing. So they can't criticize it for the real reasons that you should criticize it. And let's just straight off the bat, there are numerous reasons to criticize the World Economic Forum, which we'll come on to. And they do actually pose a degree of danger, but it's not what people are saying. And the reason that it's not what people are saying is because the people that pay them are doing exactly the same thing. And he lays it out here, Haskins. For those that support free markets, the Great Reset is nothing short of terrifying. Our current crony capitalist system has many flaws. Crony capitalism is where corporations have influence over politicians by cronyism. He's literally saying the system's corrupt, but at the minute, I'm at the top of that system, so can we not fuck with the system? That is exactly what he's saying. Crony capitalism is where businesses thrive through collusion between business and politics, right? Okay, A, this is terrible. B, that's exactly what the World Economic Forum is. It just is doing it in a slightly more palatable way to the Heartlands. So it doesn't actually give more power. It proposes the companies give the impression of caring to get customers. That's what it's about. It's nothing for people to be concerned about. So that's why they're lying about it. Well, it is something for people to be concerned about, but not in the sense that they're going to take all your property off you. Laura Ingraham is on Fox News, and she's another one that is connected to Murdoch, is connected to the Heritage Foundation, the oil refinery industry through his connections with sort of shareholders. She's been known to take money from the Kochs. Again, she's basically just lying. When Bernard Looney comes on and says, I work for BP, we really should consider the green stuff and blah, blah, blah. It's nonsense. They really shouldn't take anything seriously. They're not going to do these. Do you really think that British Petroleum actually wants to do anything about, like, British Petroleum? That's essentially what the theory is, that there's a massive plot that's apparently involving Biden, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and BP, and the plot is to do over BP, and at the same time the world population. Again, there's no mechanism for this. There's no intent to do this. It's just nonsense. Everything that she said, all your individual rights are going to be take a back seat for promoting the values of global health and harmony. Strategies for fighting COVID, just like strategies for fighting poverty or climate change, should all follow the same path. Everything that she said is a lie. None of it is in the book at all. And she says that it's basically Biden's agenda. And she says it's because Biden keeps saying build back better. The reason Biden says build back better is the same reason that everyone said change a few years ago, because politicians are lazy. And if a slogan works, they will reuse it. They're the Led Zeppelin of slogans. Like, they will just simply use anything that works and claim it to be themselves.
It's always 3 words.
Yeah, exactly. It's an earworm. It's a jingle more than anything. And that's why all these people are using it. And again, like Rempel said, to basically curry favour with the World Economic Forum, because let's not muck about. The World Economic Forum is very, very powerful, and it's got some very, very wealthy people, but not in the way that people think, like mostly because it's not concerned with change. It's not concerned with green ideologies. It gives the barest, thinnest veneer of giving 2 shits about the world. It's about making money while seeming to give a shit about putting something back. When they're talking about intellectual property rights and stuff like that, they were actually talking about vaccines. Like, so when she says, oh, they want to destroy our trademark laws and our patent laws and stuff, actually that was saying that the World Economic Forum was saying that poor countries should get access to vaccines. They actually went back on their word, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. But she's, again, can you believe, misrepresented that. It's not that you won't have any of these things. She's just cherry-picked phrases and, you know, literally mined the document for things that sound scary. She then basically says that she shows Bill Gates discussing the potential need for vaccine passports, and she ties this in with digital IDs and stuff like that. Again, like, the digital ID concept was in the 4th Industrial Revolution, and it was an imagination thing. It was like, well, you know, everyone's got stuff on your phone now. What if your ID's on your phone and stuff like that? It's not policy. It was just a what if. So that kind of blows that particular one out of the water. But the other point to take about Laura Ingraham is essentially, again, she's part of the same nexus. She's financed by the Kochs and also by the Murdoch family. So she has an agenda to push. Again, this is why they've come up with this theory, because they can't just tell the truth and say the main problem is that they have incredible lobbying power. They have to come up with this nonsense to scare you, because they do exactly the same thing. James Dellingpole works for the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail, the Spectator, Breitbart. Alan Jones works for Sky News, which is Murdoch. It's the same people telling you exactly the same thing. And again, can you believe that basically everything that they said was nonsense and lies? Starting with the fact that basically he said that Dellingpole wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. It's like, yes, he absolutely was. And then he's worked for the Northcliffes, the Barclay brothers. He's worked for the Kochs. He's worked for the Mercers and Steve Bannon. He's right at this top echelon. This is elite people gaslighting you to tell you that these other elite people are basically trying to install communism, which it goes totally against exactly the point of what the World Economic Forum is to do, which is to make money for the corporations that are attracted to it. Again, it's the mirror opposite of what communism is. But anyway, so when Dellingpole is saying that it's a coup for the globalist elites, these guys are serious. Their plan is to reduce us to the status of serfs, which, of course, elites have been doing through the ages. A tiny elite control the people of Christendom. There's nothing in any of the World Economic Forum material about lowering the standards of living. Like, do they give a shit? No. Would they piss on you if you're on fire? No. But I'm sure there's a website article about pissing on people when there's on fire, because that's the sort of people that they want to come across as. Again, he totally misrepresents the article by Ida Auken, and as does Alan. Well, every key decision, what you do for a living, how much stuff you will consume will be decided by a remote, unaccountable delete. There's nothing in the books that even remotely comes close to that. There's nothing that they can actually do that comes close to sort of hitting that. But James Dellingpole is very obvious. He's dog whistling the concept of the New World Order. And this concept to say that the pandemic was planned by the World Economic Forum through CP and Event 201. So I went back and watched Event 201. And to suggest that a pandemic planning forum is evidence that they created the pandemic is as silly as saying the fire brigade obviously burnt down my school because they insisted on us having fire drills every other month. But again, something was missed by everybody with Event 201. It's about collaboration. All they're talking about is basically they're saying, like, let's collaborate. We could get corporations together and we could collaborate. And on the face of it, right, that seems quite altruistic and whatnot, but it's not. Right, what the actual Event 201 and the problem with Event 201 was not indicative that they created a pandemic. It's indicative that there is a selection of corporations that have sufficient influence to manage crises, and it has really no bearing on whether they manage the crisis well or not. It's the power and the influence that they have. So let me explain this to you. Basically, what they're doing with, say, CP and Event 201 is they're consolidating certain companies and giving the impression that basically they've got the mechanism to solve these problems so that governments go to them first and give them contracts. So imagine I live in an area where there's like constant floods and whatnot, and I have a flood system. Right? Basically, I say, right, okay, if there's ever a flood, you come to me. I'll sort it out. Now, that's on the surface sounds all well and good, but I'm going to bill you, and you can only use my equipment. And if you use anyone else's equipment, you've breached my contract. And so basically, it's one of these things where, although there may be benefits for the community out there, I mean, obviously nobody wants to live in a flood, I've positioned myself where I get first bite of the cherry and I get the first and most lucrative contracts, to the point where nobody else gets to tender a contract. It's me, okay? And that's where the actual danger of these corporations comes in, because they blur the line between government oversight and corporate oversight to the point where corporations get a say on the management of situations. And what all corporations are about, regardless of whether they pander to PR with stakeholder capitalism or whether they're just the out-and-out shareholder capitalism, they're out for profit. That's what they're about. And ultimately, it works out better for the company that has the good PR. So when Dellingpole says, I urge anyone who thinks this is a conspiracy theory to do a bit of background reading. The Great Reset combined with UN Agenda 2030 is a complete transformation of our society on lines I would call communist or fascist. I mean, frankly, what's the difference? Well, first, that's a stupid statement because they are the diametrically opposite political systems. What he means is tyrannical systems or tyrannicism or something like that.
What he means is authoritarian, doesn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, well, if I'm being honest, he's really just trying to scare people by using like scary words. But that's not what the Great Reset is about. It's about giving the impression of giving a shit so that they get the contracts first. They're not interested in changing anything. They're not interested in anything that's going to actually alter anything. They just want to give the impression that they do. Like my mate in the shed. So Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. Well, Tucker Carlson of the Swanson TV Dinners multi-millionaire family, works for the Murdochs and the Kochs. Candace Owens, married to a Bullingdon Club member, works for the Kochs and the Davos family. These are going to tell us how these elitists are going to try and, tell us how to live our lives on Fox News. Like, it's nonsense, right? You could be really bitchy, and basically when she says that the World Economic Forum is a system of modernized slavery, why does she give a shit? According to her, slavery wasn't that bad and white people freed the slaves, basically. Some could point out that that's like praising a rapist for stopping raping you, but let's not get bogged down in reality or facts. We'll be here all night. So when she says stuff like, in the book, The Great Reset, we're looking at modernized systems of slavery, and its stated objective is by 2030 you will own nothing. That's a complete lie. It's not an objective. That's taken from the Ida Auken essay. It's nothing to do with the Great Reset book, and she must know this if she's read it. I don't suspect she's read it, to be quite honest, because, like, again, she's just spouting tropes. And again, the reason that she can't say...
More than likely not. They can't read.
This is very, very possibly true, mate. But when she says they're using COVID to crash the Western economy and implement communist policies, that's such an obvious dog whistle to cultural Marxism. It is literally the cultural Marxist theory to the destruction of Western civilization through supposed liberal policies in order to bring about world communism. And it really isn't. Again, when people like Cory Bernardani say that the Great Reset is socialism on a global scale, it really obviously isn't, by the very dane of the fact that it has all these massive blue chip corporations, and you can't be involved in the World Economic Forum, or you could try, but you're going to fail unless you've got a huge amount of money. As I say, the majority of these companies are like 5 billion global turnover. So, and this is why the theory is so nebulous, because it's just made up. They're just throwing sort of tropes at you. The Great Reset is a globalist communist agenda because it aims to create a great state at the global level, commanded by large multinational corporations. Large multinational corporations are the very antithesis of communism. It's literally that silly. Moving on to Glenn Beck and Dave Rubin. Now, Glenn Beck has worked with the Kochs and been financed by the Kochs in the past. Dave Rubin is financed by the Kochs through George Mason University. So again, they have an agenda to paint a certain swathe of business people in one light and a certain swathe of business people in another light. And when he says stuff like George Soros started the World Economic Forum, and without Soros there would be no World Economic Forum, it's just not true. Soros was nothing to do with the World Economic Forum. He spoke there, but he certainly wasn't the founder of it. And this is just Glenn Beck obviously trying to appeal to... I mean, if you want to be kind, he's appealing to the George Soros conspiracy theory. If you want to be honest, he's appealing to the world Jewish conspiracy theory.
Which was very popular, obviously, at that time because of the rise of BLM and Antifa and the unrest in America. You know, it was a popular conspiracy theory to push at that time.
But again, it was really was an extension of the cultural Marxism thing. Basically, then goes on to say stuff like China is the model, and through the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and all the stuff Soros is funding, they're all working together to bring this Chinese system of total control. And he says that all the COVID rules were because of the Great Reset, and he says that basically the COVID rules were actually in the Great Reset book. There's two problems with that. One, no, they weren't. And two, the Great Reset book came out after all the sort of implementations and COVID rules had come in. And although people like to state that the World Health Organization basically cracked down on people, it's a voluntary organization. The World Health Organization has next to no power. Right? It has logistical power in as much as it is a forum where they can collect and collate and, you know, people can collaborate and stuff like that. But it certainly has no governmental power, which I think, you know, if anyone took even the slightest, like, sort of sense to look at it and see that the differing COVID policies across the planet, then you can see that there wasn't a uniform response by any stretch of the imagination. There are certain things that were common, like using a handkerchief when you sneeze. Like, you know.
Yeah, and it all seemed like a lot of virtue signaling from the government, to be fair, as well. It didn't feel like they cared about it here in the UK.
Absolutely not. They did not care about it in the UK.
They only did it because we cared about it.
Yes, they wanted to do that. That's why they opened things like the Nightingale hospitals, which were basically just white elephants. They never had any staff for them. That's why they basically gave the impression of giving a shit, but they also moved like COVID positive patients in with vulnerable care home patients. And essentially their entire policy was based on whether they could get away with herd immunity and placating the oil industry. That's why they didn't extend the lockdown. That's why they didn't close the airports down, for crying out loud. In the middle of a pandemic, although you couldn't fly out, you could fly into this country. Why? Because the donors to the Tory party, the current government, are these same people, essentially, the same people that are creating the Great Reset theory. The Kochs, the Barclays, the North Cliffs, Murdoch, to a lesser extent, people like the Mercers and stuff like that. This nexus of American businesses connected to Big Pharma, oil refinery, and UK, Australia, and American media that is right-wing conservative, and they don't give a shit about you, and they don't give a shit about anybody. And it is very, very clear that basically government policy was based on placating these people, their donors, rather than actually showing any meaningful health policy. And that alone knackers the entire Great Reset theory, to be quite honest. But we shall persevere anyway. So basically, as I say, he's lying. When Glenn Beck then goes on to talk about the device with the social credit score in China, that's totally made up. There's a lot of bollocks talking about the Chinese credit score, and I'm going to, right from the off, say I don't like it. I don't think it's a good idea. The very idea is anathema to me, to be honest, but it's been massively hyped up. It's not actually operational yet. It's been mass tested in a lot of cities, but it's more tied to credit, by which I mean your financial credit. The reason for that is bizarre. Culturally in China, due to the revolution, and where basically families were turning on each other, and culturally there is a lack of trust in China. And so a lot of people in China see these things as ways of basically, they're like sort of TripAdvisor reviews for people, dependent on how likely you are to be able to pay your bill or run off and defraud somebody. Do I agree with it? No. And it is tied into sort of like broader things like, say, traffic violations, and it can restrict things like travel and stuff like that. But the hype about it in the Western world as this sort of Blade Runner, fucking Running Man, I don't know,
Black Mirror.
Yeah, Black Mirror, exactly. It's very apt that you bring up Black Mirror, because you know another person that is very worried about the Chinese social credit system and feels that it might actually be a dystopia akin to Black Mirror. You know who that person is?
Please tell me.
George Soros.
What?
Exactly.
Seriously,
George Soros. Like, George Soros has got massive problems with the Chinese system. At the World Economic Forum, George Soros did a big speech basically saying that he doesn't like China as a society. He doesn't like the Chinese sort of system of government, and he especially doesn't like any surveillance systems like the Chinese surveillance systems. He says, whilst entrepreneurs and policymakers are enthusiastically debating over the possible benefits and harms of AI at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland this week, billionaire investor and philanthropist wanted to bring attendees' attention to China, where an apocalyptic AI-dominated future many fear is already turning into a reality. During a private dinner on Thursday, Soros warned his fellow business leaders of the great danger of China's Black Mirror-esque social credit score system, which would rank the country's 1.4 billion citizens by an individual credit score derived from their social behavior using AI and machine learning tech. And Soros said, I want to call attention to the mortal danger facing open societies from the instruments of control that machine learning and AI can put in the hands of repressive regimes. The social credit system is not yet fully operational, but it's clear where it's heading. It will subordinate the fate of the individual to the interests of the one-party state in ways unprecedented in history. So George Soros is totally opposed to the surveillance society, and particularly the Chinese system of social credit. I have to admit, I myself was surprised when I found that out. But yeah, that's the facts of the matter. He's just totally making it up. And you said it was Justin Haskins, that actually introduced the concept of the Great Reset to Glenn Beck. Is that correct?
To Glenn Beck, yeah. There's a video online. We'll post it on Twitter. But
yeah, so essentially Glenn Beck has jumped on it to as the latest scare tactic. And you know why? Because Glenn Beck is associated with people like the Kochs, and Dave Rubin is associated with people like the Kochs. So this is the important thing. You wouldn't know about the Great Reset unless the Heartlands Institute, Laura Ingraham, who's sponsored by the Kochs and the Murdochs, Dave Rubin, who's sponsored by the Kochs, Glenn Beck is sponsored by the Kochs, Paul Joseph Watson, who's sort of kind of connected to the Mercer network through InfoWars, James Dellingpole, who's financed by the Kochs and the Barclay brothers and the Northcliffes and the Mercers. All of these people, there is something that connects these people. These people, as I say, are essentially propaganda agents for people that favour shareholder capitalism. So they've made up this complete nonsense theory in order to demonize this particular set of other people. Are these set of other people very good? No, and we're going to come on to that. But this is just, there's no substance to anything that these people are saying.
Well, most like propaganda is laced in conspiracy theory, so it makes sense.
Yes, exactly, absolutely, and that's it. So my final point on Glenn Beck, when he was saying that the ESG scores, if you remember the environmental social governance scores, because of the Great Reset, and he implies that these will be put onto people in the future. There's several things that are wrong with that. To an extent, yes, they have actually come from the World Economic Forum, because they promote that as a way to sort of like, as a rating system. But the problem is, most people in the world don't actually care about these things. You know, one of the companies with the lowest ESG score in the world.
No, I got a guess, and I don't know, but let me say Amazon.
No. Well, yes, actually, theirs is particularly low, and they're a member of the World Economic Forum, so like they don't obviously care. Tesla's got one of the lowest ESG scores in the world, and it clearly hasn't actually affected their ability to make money. And here's the stupid thing. ESG scores are there to appeal to shareholders. They're there to attract people to buy shares in your company. So they're not going against the concept of shareholders. Again, it's another paper-thin veneer of appearing to be like good, like a, say, TripAdvisor sort of rating. But nobody's going up for it. But the fact that Glenn Beck basically says the way to stop the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum is to get rid of ESG scores for companies, it just totally shows his hand, doesn't it? Because basically, because he's financed essentially connected to oil companies and shareholder capitalist companies, that's his agenda. His agenda is to rubbish this off and get people to say, no, we want the traditional exploitative capitalism. And again, I'll reiterate, I don't think that the World Economic Forum form of capitalism is any better. It's the same shit with a bow around it.
Like you said, The Wire and Gomorrah, but you know,
exactly.
If there's only two choices, I guess I'm going to go for Gomorrah, because at least maybe I can change Gomorrah, you know?
Well, no. Like, and here's the problem with it. You can't change Gomorrah. You can either sort of go with the flow, or it's preferable to just shooting it up on the corner every other day. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to accept that the company's in control, the company's dictating how you live your life, and that's the problem. That's the lobbying power, essentially, the way that they almost have the power to influence governments in a very, very subtle way. As with Gomorrah, they're not actually interested in cleaning up the estate. Their main focus is selling the drugs. It's all about the drugs, and anything else is a mechanism to sell the drugs. And the same thing applies with the Great Reset and with the World Economic Forum. All this, we give a shit about the world, we care about the environment. They don't. They absolutely don't. They're not interested in changing the world. They're not interested in anything other than promoting themselves. There's this concept of the Davos man. The Davos man has been interpreted as like a globalist, right? Okay, because they don't have any sort of national allegiance, but they don't have a global allegiance either. They have an allegiance to themselves and their, for want of a better phrase, fraternal brothers. They're collective. Right, the best again. If people are fans of The Wire and Gomorrah and stuff like that, at a time The Wire did go for the stakeholder capitalism when they got the co-op together, when all the drug dealers came together and decided to we'll work together because it's more profit for anybody. And then, if you remember, Marlowe was like, I'm not interested in that. I want to destroy the co-op. Marlowe is the Great Reset conspiracy theory. I know that might sound silly, right? Okay, but that's the best way I can think of explaining it. Going on to Paul Joseph Watson, who said, the Great Reset is about enacting a drastic reduction in living standards for the plebs, which will force us to put bugs, weeds and sewage on the menu as the Davos elite continue to feast on the finest cuisine. And then you've got loads of memes floating about like eat bugs, be happy, you'll own nothing, you'll live in a pod, you'll be happy. And again, this is all sort of like a sort of a misreading and a misjudging of the importance of the Ida Auken essay, and also the fact that the World Economic Forum basically put up an article on their website talking about the possibility of eating insects as a way of reducing methane output, because meat and the production of meat creates a lot of greenhouse gases and stuff like that. Now, again, I'm going to point out that this article that they put on their website doesn't show a mechanism of how this will work. It just says this is an option. But basically, the Great Reset gained serious traction across the far right. As it has, its proponents have been increasingly consumed by a particularly bizarre notion that sinister elites want to force ordinary people to stop eating meat and instead subsist on a diet of bugs whilst they sip champagne, eat steaks and laugh at us all. Great Reset proponents insist that their rah-rah sustainability messaging is really the groundwork that elites will use to eventually micromanage the smallest aspects of our lives in their post-pandemic hellscape. This is an article in the Daily Beast called COVID Truthers' New Freak Out is being forced to eat bugs. And what they did was they interviewed people who work in the insect industry, because this has been a sort of thing for years. And it says that the insect-based food industry is utterly baffled by this development, in large part because they've been promoting their product as sustainable alternatives to meat for years without catching much paranoid flack. The article points out that about 2 billion people across 130 nations have long-standing and active insect-eating traditions. In most cases, this is not because they are chronically desperate or coerced into eating bugs, but because insects are an abundant source of protein and actually taste pretty good. And in fact, apparently many American and European communities also ate insects until about the 20th century. So it used to be more common than it is. To the surprise of absolutely no one, conspiracy theorists are not only late to the game on insect foods, but their arguments don't hold water. For starters, one of the biggest challenges to the industry of producing insects for foods is trying to address the high costs of their food. The result of still developing farming production and distribution strategies, crickets can cost 4 times as much as premium US-based beef cuts. So rather than swill to fast upon the poor, insects are currently a luxury food. The concept of using insects as a sort of replacement for meat has just gone down the tubes because it's incredibly expensive to produce enough insects to get any, enough food, and so they're looking at other things like altering the feed of cattle so that they far less, essentially. But yeah, so can you believe that Paul Joseph Watson was wrong?
What about the sewage? He said we would eat sewage. Did you do any research on that?
I couldn't find anything about the sewage. I think that might just be Paul Joseph Watson just being a knob, which I know it goes massively against his character, but.
Was it some sort of weird metaphor for like the sauce or the gravy on a dish?
I think what it is, now that I think about it, is that there's a video of Bill Gates drinking water that was sewage that has been filtered. I'm pretty sure it was connected to some sort of disease management thing. You know, spraying Bill Gates with a connection to this whole thing, and just this is the point. It's so scattershot with the theory. It's Bill Gates. It's this blah 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 blah, and it's nebulous at best.
It's always the same people.
Yeah, that's the theory. It starts on the assumption that these people are bad and that anything they do is bad, and therefore that's it. It's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Which is kind of what I was saying at the very beginning of the podcast, that a lot of this is based on two different views, and that's like suspicion or cynicism. One side thinks that these people are very suspicious, and the other side don't think that these people are genuine. So they're cynical about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's the biggest question here. Who's genuine, who isn't?
But this is the thing. That's why this was so ripe for being a conspiracy theory. But this is where these other people who are just as sort of, nefarious have just gone, look over here. Look at this. Like, don't pay attention to us. And again, rather than using the actual legitimate complaints about the World Economic Forum, they've had to create this nonsensical sort of vision of dystopia because they can't rail those criticisms against the World Economic Forum, because then you'll turn around to Candace Owens and go, well, that's exactly what your boss does. And that's exactly what your husband does. And that's exactly what, all of these people's bosses do. But again, can you believe that when Paul Joseph Watson was talking about implantable chips to read people's thoughts and blah, 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 and brain scans to cross borders? No, he doesn't. He's discussing future tech and its pros and cons. And he actually says in the book, it's like the rocket pack discussion, but he says that the lack of privacy is not okay. But again, it doesn't really matter because they're just discussing stuff that might happen that they could potentially make money off. There's also a real need for these people to tie it to the Green New Deal. Now, what the Green New Deal was to say, like this idea to be completely carbon free by 2030. It's unrealistic, but it's one of these things where it's probably a very good idea doing that sort of thing. But again, the people connected to the oil industry and sort of the satellite industries of that, can you believe they're not super keen on upending their entire industry? Right, now this is the thing. As capabilities in this area prove, the temptation for law enforcement agents and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, assess guilt, or even possibly retrieve memories direct from people's brains will increase. And again, Paul Joseph Watson infers that this is Klaus Schwab saying that we need to have Minority Report style sort of brain scanning and stuff like that. And it's not. Again, he basically just says that perhaps in the future this will happen. And, if we've got this technology, people will be inclined to use it. And then he goes on to talk for about 4 or 5 pages about, well, that would be bad because of this and that would be good. But weighing it up pros and cons and stuff like that. And furthermore, there's actually also a system in the USA called Trapwire that already looks out for sort of suspicious movement and is essentially a pre-crime determinator. That was leaked in the Stratfor hack by Lulsec.
Yeah, I'm wondering, he obviously doesn't come up with these ideas. It's because he runs this massive forum and sees all the technology, the people coming up with these innovative ideas, and he puts it together in little essays and says, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that the perfect example is this. Paul Joseph Watson goes on to say that basically he makes it clear that implantable microchips will be the cornerstone of his transhumanist agenda. And he uses a quote, active implantable microchips that break the skin barrier will change how we interface with the world and force us to question what it means to be human. Can you believe he's misused the quote? The actual quote is, earbuds and glasses are giving way to active implantable microchips that break the skin barrier, and these will change how we interface with the world. And then there's a bit of a sentence in between, and then it says, I believe, and this is, and forces to question what it means to be human. But then Schwab actually goes on to say, so where do we draw the line? He's not promoting augmentation. He's discussing potential pros and cons. He's basically having the discussion that every fucking manga has had since the dawn of manga videos. At what point does the ghost in the shell become a ghost?
Well, this is an old conspiracy theory as well, the transhumanism conspiracy theory.
The thing that's always got me about transhumanism is that basically, like, you've got a fucking computer in your pocket. That's transhumanism. You're wearing glasses. Glasses is transhumanism. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I like at the very extreme point, like I can get where there might be problems with it and stuff like that. But again, it just seems to be one of these sort of things where people get a bit hysterical about stuff. Like, is a hearing aid or a prosthetic limb transhumanism? Probably. Is it bad? No, it isn't. There's more nuance to these discussions than most people will actually give sort of credence to. But anywho,
yeah, and I would say, like, obviously most of the technology is being thought of to enhance people's lives.
Yeah. Are rich people going to get first access to it, take advantage of it? Are there going to be questions that arise about, say, unfair advantage? If you've got a brain implant or whatever, right, in the same way that you don't have to take a calculator into an exam, if you've got some sort of augmented tech or whatever, there are conversations that need to be had about this. But in the same way that cars changed what it meant to be human, mass transit systems change what it means to be human. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, again, there's a lot of hysteria and a lot of data mining and cherry picking of quotes in order to basically just paint this entire thing as nefarious. And can you believe that Ben Shapiro is no different? Now, Ben Shapiro is financed by the Wilkes brothers. Ben Shapiro gets on my fucking nerves. WAP killer Ben Shapiro. Are you aware of his argument with that particular song?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
he felt that it was very, very offensive. But his wife reassured him that WAP's not normal. Bless her heart. Anyway, like the Wilkes brothers, who own Ben Shapiro, who financed Ben Shapiro, they own PragerU and they're fracking billionaires. Like, they're also sort of very hard right Christian. And again, can you believe that basically Ben Shapiro's lying when he used when Klaus Schwab says that the future is being built by us? He's basically implying that they're saying, look, we're in control of the world. Like, we're going to dictate what's going to happen, like in some sort of Hitler-esque type speech. And he even does this sort of German accent. The actual quote is, the future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community, as you have here in this room. We have the means to improve the state of the world with two conditions are necessary. The first one is that we all act as stakeholders of large communities, that we serve not only our self-interests, but we serve the community. That's what we call stakeholder responsibility. And the second is that we all collaborate. The considerate bastard.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just sounds like a motivational speech.
Well, it is. I mean, the main problem with what he's saying is that it's bollocks, that he has no intention of doing any of this. But what he's saying is not actually that bad, really. But again, we will come on to that is the danger. Shapiro basically says, like, by reimagining capitalism, he means that we should pick the winners and the losers. He should be able to dictate the rules of the game. He's not saying that at all. Like, he's basically just like using a very clever PR strategy to pitch his particular form of capitalism against people who are more ruthless in capitalism, such as the Wilkes brothers, who just so happen to be the people that pay Ben Shapiro's wages. Capitalism is not a system that was designed, it's a system that arose over a course of centuries to allow people to keep the fruits of their own labour and they'll freely trade their own labours. No, it fucking is not, right? Capitalism is law of the jungle. If you've got the means of production or the capital, then basically you can rule through force and oppression. Capitalism itself is built on the very foundation of exploitation. In order to have profit, you need to get more out of your worker than you pay them. That is capitalism 101, comrades. Like, so Ben Shapiro is just spouting shit because he's part of this system. Capitalism and the rich is a perpetuated system that requires capital to change it. It's exploitative. Unless you own a factory, unless you have means of production of capital, you are not a capitalist, even in a capitalist society. I'm not a capitalist. You're not a capitalist. Nobody who's listening to this is a capitalist unless the Wilkes brothers happen to be tuning in which case, but I don't think they are. Also, there's a meme that goes around, and again, I'm not a communist, or I'm not idiotic enough to think that communism is a great system, but communism killed 100 million people. You know, capitalism kills that every 5 years. Every 5 years, capitalism, through the exploitative nature that drives famine, drought, wealth inequality, homelessness, and that's even before you get into things like drug addiction and alcoholism and stuff like that. Every 5 years, it kills 100 million people. So this idea that Ben Shapiro is trying to say that basically, like, oh, no, capitalism's a great system. Like, oh, there's no way that it creates inequality or climate change. It does by its very necessity. It has to, because that's the basis of its system. When he says that free market capitalism means that there's no rulers, no person at the top, that's a fucking bald-faced lie. The rulers are the people who have enough money to influence. It is literally that. It's tops at the top, plebs at the bottom, and twats like Ben Shapiro in the middle making a fat pile of cash by basically stoking aggression and divide so that people don't actually look at the real issues. When he describes stakeholder capitalism as like, oh, that means Klaus Schwab and his friends, that's not true. What he's actually describing there is shareholder capitalism. If you are willing and able and financially secure enough to buy shares in this company, then you get the backing of and the benefits of this company and some of the profit margin. Stakeholder capitalism, on the surface of it, promotes sort of wider progressive issues and actually gives something back to the communities that it's taking out of. As we'll come on to, it doesn't. It's bollocks. It's a PR coup. But basically that is why it is so threatening, again, to people like Ben Shapiro. Now, when Klaus Schwab says we want to penetrate the cabinets, yeah, that is where it starts to be concerning, because basically it's about this influence.
Let me just be fair. He didn't say we want to penetrate. He said we're happy that we've penetrated.
No, I think he said we penetrate the cabinets. He's bragging. He's boasting. Okay, we've all dreamt of penetrating cabinets, mostly with railroad spikes. Oh, absolutely. Or with other very blunt instruments that require hammers. But what he means is, again, it's this lobbying power, and he's bragging. Now, to a degree, it's true, because again, we saw this with Trudeau trying to curry favour with him. But it doesn't mean that he's an acolyte, and it doesn't mean that they can directly influence policy, nor that they have a global sort of influence in that sense. But it is troubling. But here's the interesting thing, is that the two that he cites as young global leaders are Justin Trudeau and Vladimir Putin. Now, I don't know what to make of this, because I can't find any evidence that they're on any young global leaders lists. So I don't think he was speaking literally. I think he was saying these are people that have been to the conference and people that basically extol our values. He's jacking them off, essentially, isn't he? It's like me getting on the radio with my imaginary club and going, Kanye West's what's my club called? Club Neil. Kanye West is a Club Neil kind of guy. And you know who else is? Who else is cool? I don't know. Who's cool at the minute? That Lady Gaga. She's a Club Neil kind of guy. And that's what this is. We'll come on to why this is a problem in a second. But again, it's been vastly overstated by people as essentially a Bond villain giving away his plot, not able to contain himself, like a duper's delight of, yes, we rule the world. You noticed, had you? Anywho, Is Klaus Schwab a Satanist? I mean, we've all seen him dressed up like a sort of industrial metal artist with these big shoulder pads and all of that. No, he isn't. Essentially, this was university robes. He was receiving an honorary doctorate from Kaunas University of Technology in Lithuania. Now, I'll be the first to admit, he looks like a Cenobite. He looks really, really weird. It's a strange get-up, but apparently this is the garb that is traditional for Lithuanian universities, or at the very least, this particular one. And I suppose if you showed pictures of people in a mortarboard and a cloak, you could make the same arguments. Like, who's this twat running around like fucking Harry Potter or whatever?
Yeah, if you showed that to a different culture, they probably would have a very different view of it if they had never seen something like that before.
There's no doubt that it does look strange, but that's just because of our lack of knowledge of the context of it. So, no, Klaus Schwab is not a Satanist. Build Back Better. Now, you could make the argument that that is a stylized 666, and you could also make the argument that the World Economic Forum logo is stylized 666. But I don't know about that one. That's one of those things where you've baited the hook before you've even done it. Why would it be a stylized 666? Because they're evil. How do we know they're evil? Because they've got a stylized 666. Do you know what I mean?
Circular reasoning.
It could be. It could well be. And maybe I'm wrong. And maybe, he is actually the devil incarnate. And I've missed these two particular clues. But I don't know about that sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
To be fair, I haven't actually. I've been really trying to find out sort of an explanation for their logo. Because sometimes they say, "Oh, it's like BMW is representative of like planes' rotor blades or whatever," and things like that. But I couldn't find anything to explain the logo.
The swoosh that goes around is obviously the world, right? It's a silhouette of the globe. And the O's are from World Economic Forum. They've all got O's in them.
Well, yeah.
And so it all matches together like that. But what I was thinking is that the O's are connected through that world thing. So the O's are like groups, like circles.
Yeah.
Like these people, like they have circles, like they're corporations, and they're all connected through the World Economic Forum. Yeah, that's a bit more conspiratorial, but it's less satanic.
Or they're all connected by Satan.
Okay.
I mean, this is the problem with stuff like this, is that there is no. If you're convinced that is indicative of devil worship, then you're always going to see that.
Yeah, I did. That's exactly what I would have saw. I would have said that's exactly what it is. I would have thought Build Back Better was a bit of a childish way, really, to put a magic spell on. Because that's essentially what the conspiratorial view of these things are. They are putting black magic spells on people.
Yeah, they'll keep repeating it, and it's like invoking like a sigil or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I don't believe that anymore, but that is how I saw it. That's how conspiracy land is taught it. Q people, they believe that. The people before Q stuff, like the Pizzagate people, the people before that, David Icke sort of people, Freeman of the Land, we were speaking about him before.
Yeah. No, totally. No, you're absolutely right. I remember telling my mate that the DEFRA symbol was 666 and stuff like that. And yeah, people like to see patterns, don't they? And but having said that, if somebody can show me, no, this is definitely it, and they can match it up to show me some evidence that it's not just a coincidence, and I will follow that evidence. But I couldn't find anything other than, yeah, kinda. And that's not good enough for me. Was his mother a Rothschild? No. Although his mother's maiden name was Rothschild, and she was the daughter of a banker called Louis Rothschild, they're not connected to the Rothschild family. And in fact, she never actually knew Klaus. She left in 1939 when he was very, very young, and then his father remarried, and his stepmother was called Erika Epprecht, and he dedicates all these books to his parents, his father, Eugene Schwab and Erica Schwab, who is his stepmother, but he took to be his real mother. Now, was his father a Nazi? Yes, it would appear that he probably was, or at the very least was in a position where he was in Nazi Germany and was a factory owner. And it looks like his company, Escher Weiss, they did use slave labor and they did produce flamethrowers and other equipment for Nazi Germany. That's true. But here's the thing, without wanting to in any way defend the regime of the Nazis. So I don't want anyone to think that we're doing that. You had two choices in Nazi Germany. Like, you either went along with the system, or you ran away or were murdered. And even if he was, let's take it as read, okay, that Klaus Schwab's dad literally made lamps out of Jews himself, right? Okay, it's tangential. Might it have affected Klaus Schwab's psyche? Yeah, it may well have done. But it could have affected it in a number of ways. He could have been reviled by that.
Yeah.
You don't know. So there's a huge amount of assumptions that is a red flag of evil intent. And I don't think it is. Is he in the Bilderberg group?
Yes,
he is in the Bilderberg group. And again, the problems with the Bilderberg group are the same problems that we're going to find with the World Economic Forum, the same problems that we had with the Bohemian Grove. It's the secretive nature of the potential lobbying and the sort of potential bypassing of democratic process. But here's the thing about the secretive nature of the Bilderberg group. How we found this out is because it's on the Bilderberg group's website.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Just like Bohemian Grove, they have a website, which, by the way, you can apply to go and work there. It kind of goes against this ultimate secret. And again, I'm not stupid. It is secret. It is opaque and elitist. All of these things are. And that is the problem, that you don't know what they're doing there. And there's the potential for social cohesion, as William Donhoff puts it. In many ways, all this Great Reset bullshit, do you know what I mean? Like, it distracts from the real thing. Whilst we're focusing on the fact that they're going to force feed us bugs and take our Jimmy Choos away from us, like, we're missing the fact that they're basically lobbying and getting incredible influence in other areas. Whilst we're worrying that they're going to implement green policies that mean that we're not allowed to breathe out from 3 till 5 every afternoon, they're actually not concerned about that at all, regulating themselves and getting away with all sorts of fucking shit. And that's the problem, which, again, we shall come on to in a minute. Did he want to depopulate the world? Is that quote about the 4 billion useless eaters real? Well, I mean, it's a real quote, but it's not from anything that's connected to the World Economic Forum or Klaus Schwab. It's from the John Coleman book, The Committee of 300. And that's just been erroneously spread around. But even today, I went on Twitter and saw Right Said Fred putting something up about the Great Reset and Klaus Schwab. And the tweet was, I learned about this depopulation stuff 20 years ago, and it's all starting to come to pass. It's like, for fuck's sake, how long is this depopulation? I mean, like, aside from the fact that basically the population is higher now than it's ever been, if this 20-year plot has been going on to depopulate the planet, they're pretty piss poor at it, to be honest, aren't they? They're not great at it.
Yeah, and their job is just getting harder and harder by the years.
Precisely.
They're going to have to wipe more and more people out.
Exactly. And now they've banned abortions.
Yeah.
Like, they're just...
Oh, my God.
They're setting, like, traps for themselves all the way. Like, ridiculous. But anywho, does Klaus Schwab wander around in Key West in lingerie? No, he doesn't. Like, that's a character called Max Schwab. He's connected to this bar in Key West, and he seems like an absolutely brilliant fellow. But he's not Klaus Schwab. He's Max Schwab. You were saying, like, do we think that someone saw the image and thought that it was him, or do you think someone mis-Googled his name, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think someone just Googled Klaus Schwab, clicked on photos, scrolled through, found that picture, and just saw that it said Schwab, and didn't realize it said Max Schwab and just started sharing it. I mean, that is how, conspiracy theories, some of them are just Chinese whispers, aren't they?
Chinese whispers, yeah, very much so. Absolutely. I think you're right on that one. I think that it was an unfortunate misidentification. So, coming on to actual sort of real criticism of the World Economic Forum, there are lots. It's heavily criticised by anti-globalisation activists because basically it's a corporate think tank. It's a way to promote corporations. You join our club, we have the PR to promote you and get you involved in all sorts of potentially government contracts, potentially all sorts of things. The interesting thing about the World Economic Forum, when you think about the sort of conspiracy theory that it's trying to promote this new green agenda or whatever, which, by the way, isn't actually a bad thing, but let's take the dystopic nature of it, is actually opposed by loads of environmental groups. Like, for example, the Green Party used to, and sometimes still protest Davos, because they're savvy to the fact that basically the World Economic Forum's lying. They're not interested. I'm going to keep repeating this. They're not interested in green policies. They're interested in looking like they're interested in green policies. And that's why they're opposed. They have loads of projects. They don't even fucking conform to what they preach. This has actually been a criticism by sort of right-wing as well. Oh, look at all these environmentalists on their private jets. But this is true. They have an enormous carbon footprint. They also have no financial transparency. They have a tax-free status. Their security actually costs taxpayers. There's a rumour they have their own private police force. They don't. They basically use local police and stuff like that. But it does cost taxpayers. They have partnerships with groups like the UN, which is essentially like a corporate takeover of institutions that are involved in looking after people. And when you get corporations involved in anything because of the profit motive, regardless of what bollocks they tell you, that is a real problem. And the main problem and the main criticism of the World Economic Forum is that it doesn't actually address any of the fucking problems that it raises. None of these things that it keeps saying, like, oh, bloody hell, global warming, oh, bloody hell, this. It doesn't actually do anything about that. It's had a great reset pretty much every sodding year since it started. Let's just take some of the names of their big ideas at random. Oh, the new state of the world economy, rallying all the forces for global recovery, sustaining globalization, managing volatility for the 21st century, responsibility globally, managing the impact of globalization, new beginnings, making a difference, shaping the global agenda, the creative imperative, partnering for security and prosperity, resilient dynamism, new global context. It's the same shit every single year. Like, it's ridiculous.
It sounds quite a lot like the lakeside chats of Bohemian Grove.
It's not dissimilar to that, but with the lakeside chats, things actually happen. The difference between Bohemian Grove and Davos is that Davos, it's bollocks. There's no intention of any of this actually happening. It's just the sort of thing that they're saying. They're more honest at Bohemian Grove when they're talking about things like what's going to happen with oil, the Manhattan Project, maybe things like that, stuff like that. They're at least talking about stuff that might actually happen. Anything that happens in public at Davos, fucking forget it. It's for the tourists. It's absolutely for the birds. It's the other stuff that is actually important. And Naomi Klein, who wrote The Shock Doctrine, she was one of the first people to basically point this out. She's got a fabulous article called The Great Reset Conspiracy Smoothie.
The effort was called The Great The Great Reset. And through articles, videos, webinars, podcasts, and a book by WEF founder Klaus Schwab, it provides a coronavirus-themed rebranding of all the things Davos does anyway. Now hastily repackaged as a blueprint for reviving the global economy post-pandemic by seeking a better form of capitalism. The Great Reset was a place to hawk for-profit techno-fixes to complex social problems, to hear heads of transnational oil giants opine about the urgent need to tackle climate change, to listen to politicians say the things they say during crises, that this is a tragedy, but also an opportunity, that they are committed to building back better and ushering in a fairer, greener, healthier planet. Prince Charles, David Attenborough, and the head of the International Monetary Fund all figured prominently, that kind of thing. In short, the Great Reset encompasses some good stuff that won't happen and some bad stuff that certainly will. And frankly, nothing out of the ordinary in our era of green billionaires readying rockets for Mars. Indeed, anyone with even a cursory knowledge of Davos speak and the number of times it has attempted to rebrand capitalism as a slightly buggy poverty alleviation and ecological restoration program will recognize the vintage champagne in this online carafe. Long ago, however, Schwab realized that if Davos didn't add some do-gooding to its well-doing, the pitchforks that had started amassing at the foot of the mountain would eventually storm the gates. And so the giddy sessions on new markets in Malaysia and new startups in California were complemented with somber ones on melting ice caps. The Great Reset is merely the latest edition of this gilded tradition, barely distinguishable from earlier Davos big ideas from Shaping the Post-Crisis World in 2009, Rethink, Redesign, Rebuild 2010, The Great Transformation 2012, and who can forget Creating a Shared Future in a Fractured World 2018. If Davos wasn't seeking a better form of capitalism to solve the spiraling crisis Davos itself systematically deepened, it wouldn't be Davos. Why? For the same reason I keep hearing Facebook ads on NPR podcasts telling me how much Facebook wants to be regulated. Because if our corporate overlords can create this impression, it is less likely that governments will listen to the rising chorus of voices calling on them to do what is required to actually combat spiraling poverty, joblessness, climate breakdown, and informational degeneration. Regulate the companies that have created these crises and tax them, break them up, and in some cases, put them under public control. So no, the Great Reset is not just another name for the Green New Deal, as many a right-winger with a digital chalkboard and an unhealthy AOC obsession is absurdly claiming. It is, first and foremost, about blocking a real Green New Deal, which most assuredly would not have the support of BP, MasterCard, the Prince of Wales, and all the other Great Reset partners. Do these people honestly think that Schwab is in cahoots with AOC and using the pandemic to put BP out of business with the full cooperation of BP? Of course not. For right-wing politicians and the oil companies that back them, the more climate action that can be conflated with an organization known for its traffic jams or private jets and its Bond villain founder, the easier it will be to resist any climate plan at all. That's why the earliest alarmism about the Great Reset came from the Heartlands Institute, ground zero of the climate change denial machine. None of this is to say that Schwab's reset push is benign and unworthy of scrutiny. All kinds of dangerous ideas are lurking under its wide brim. The irony, though, is that the fact Vitamix currently whirring around the Great Reset actually makes it harder to hold the Davos set accountable for any of this, since legitimate critiques have now been blended together with truly dangerous anti-vax fantasies and outright coronavirus denialism.
And so in exactly the same way that we were saying that the conspiracy theory in many ways benefits what the Great Reset want to do. Let's take something like climate activism. Right said Fred or whatever, they're all over like Twitter saying, no, don't do green stuff, the Great Reset. No, don't do it. And the Great Reset is going to go, fine, we weren't going to do that shit anyway. But you keep fucking moaning about that, right, you twats, because basically, like, all you've done is literally just swallowed the Kool-Aid from one set of people that are just annoyed at this other group's better PR. Now, there are problems, right, okay, as we sort of mentioned before, like Open Democracy has done a very good article basically called Conspiracy Theories Aside, There's Something Fishy About the Great Reset. And they point out what we mentioned earlier, that basically, like, The World Economic Forum includes some of the largest companies in oil: Saudi Aramco, Shell, Chevron, BP; in food, Unilever, Coca-Cola, Nestle; in tech, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple; and in big pharma, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna. And basically saying the multi-stakeholder model of global governance, corporations are promoted to being official stakeholders in decision-making, whilst governments are neglected to being one of the many. In practice, corporations become the main stakeholders and governments take a backseat role, and civil society is mainly window dressing. So exactly what we're saying with the Gomorrah angle, say the municipality, the government, they get no say on this. It's what happens is it's driven by a corporation. Now, you may get the benefits as a stakeholder in the society, or may even not actually be bad. But the point being that the ultimate profit goes to the drug dealers or the World Economic Forum. Basically, the problem is that if done in the way that the World Economic Forum wants to do it, it's like the opposite of nationalisation. It's putting corporations in roles of authority because they've said, oh, we'll do that for you. But actually what they're doing is they're using this sort of concept of altruism in order to position themselves more favourably. But, and here's the thing, okay, it's all bollocks. It's lies. Here's the thing that completely blows the entire conspiracy theory out of it. The COVAX principle. Now, COVAX was a principle that was put around, and on the surface, it involves Gavi, it involves the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it involves the World Health Organization, it involves the World Economic Forum, and it's financed by governments, and it also involves Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Moderna. And if you believe that they manufactured the pandemic in order to get the vaccines out there and inject people with microchips, then this, on the surface, this collaboration and their public statement that they wish to make sure that there is vaccine equality over the world. What that means is that there's loads of countries in the world that are desperately crying out for vaccines against COVID, but they can't afford them. They can't afford to develop them. They can't afford to buy them, or they just don't have the access to them. They don't have the access to the markets, and they don't have the access to the laboratories. So what this group ostensibly did was set up to make sure that all these poor countries could get vaccines. Now, on the surface, it gives the impression that they're going to give them away. What it did was it ensured that intellectual property rights were kept by the manufacturers of the vaccines, which just happen to be Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Moderna, who are members of the World Economic Forum. And this means poorer countries will get access to these vaccines, but they won't get the recipe. They don't get back-engineered instructions. They don't get access to make a generic vaccine. So this idea that the World Economic Forum is trying to make everyone in the world get a vaccine, if you think that vaccines are bad or that they have microchips in them or whatever, that is the concept that they are forcing people to get the vaccine. The opposite is true. The opposite is true. They don't want anyone to get the vaccine unless you pay. And furthermore, the World Health Organization disagreed with this position, completely disagreed with this position. They felt that that was inhumane and, cruel and crass, basically positioning yourself to supply the vaccine and then at the last minute saying, well, you can't have it unless you pay for it. If this was a plot to vaccinate the planet, which was sustained by the creation of a false pandemic, don't you think that they would have just given the vaccine away? I mean, that completely negates the entire conspiracy theory, because if you think vaccines are good, then the WHO is the hero and the World Economic Forum is the villain. If you think the vaccines are bad, then the World Economic Forum is the hero.
Very interesting.
The one thing that unites all these people doing this, the World Economic Forum, is a mechanism to instate a communist regime on the planet. Ironically, they have no class. That's the best communist joke you're ever going to hear. But this is the point, right? Basically, the Great Reset is a red herring. Has the WEF got loads of problems? Yes, it's the lobbying problem. all of these things that we've just discussed, like all of the genuine problems with it. But the Great Reset as a conspiracy theory is stupid. It's made up. It's completely fabricated, and it comes from people that basically want to oppose the concept of stakeholder capitalism. Do I think stakeholder capitalism is real and is actually better? No, it's window dressing. It's absolute window dressing. But the likes of Candace, Owens and Shapiro, Beck, like Tucker Carlson, they can't criticize the World Economic Forum for the real reasons, which is the lobbying and currying favor, because that's exactly what their financiers do. Right? The Kochs, the Davoses, the Murdochs, etc. So they have to basically make up communism in order to smear people. If you've got two sets of companies, one that's basically saying, no, we don't give a shit about anything other than profit, and one that's basically going, oh, we actually care about the environment, we actually care about our employees, we want the town where we build our facilities to come and think of us as positive for the community and stuff like that, you're more likely to side with that company because they're giving you all the patter. But again, we'll tie it back. This is the best explanation of both systems. It's the Wire versus Gomorrah.
Yeah.
And in both systems, you're still flooding the city with drugs. You're still directing how these people live their lives. You're still putting everybody in danger, okay? Because even though it might be nice in the Gomorrah estate, doesn't mean that rival drug dealers aren't going to come and shoot the shit up. It works as an example because this is the problem, because ultimately capitalism is based on exploitation and based on profit. And all stakeholder capitalism is a way to soft sell it. And here's the selling point of stakeholder capitalism that Klaus Schwab basically mentions all the time in his books is you will make more in the long run. Just like in Gomorrah, like, because you don't attract the attention of the police, you don't attract trouble from people there, you are off the radar, so to speak. So you make more money in the long run. But ultimately, this is the problem, is that it's there to make these people money. But this is the point. They're not interested in change. I need to reiterate this. They're not going to do any of these green things. They're not interested in changing the world for the better. They're interested in looking like it. So, again, whilst you're worried that they're going to make you roll around in a milk float and like stuff like that, they're not going to do that. They just aren't. There's nothing in their history or in their makeup or in their members that would indicate that they want to do that. What they're interested in is making money for themselves and their members. There's enough nefarious shit about the World Economic Forum without listening to nonsense made up by other nefarious shit. I don't think that the Great Reset conspiracy theory holds any water at all. I think it's a red herring, and I think that's why everybody finds it so very difficult to actually explain what the theory is.
The opponents of the World Economic Forum and the people that are pushing this, it seems just like they have copy and pasted New World Order, cultural Marxism, etc. onto the World Economic Forum just to paint them as the new boogeyman, the new bad guy. Whereas I tend to believe like what Michelle Rempel said and agree with like Naomi Klein's reading of what is going on there. It makes a lot more sense. It seems like it's a lot more accurate when you look at the evidence.
Yeah, in retrospect, I just don't think it's a plausible theory at all. I think it's bullshit. I think we've identified where it's come from. We've identified their motive for spreading the bullshit. And I think that if anybody ever comes up to you and tells you about the Great Reset, point them in the direction of this podcast and we'll set them right.
This will certainly do it. The only question that the audience really should be left with is the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset genuine? Are they genuine or are they not? That is up to everyone, I guess, to decide based on this evidence. But are they nefarious? Are they dark, satanic occultists bringing about global enslavement of the entire world? According to the evidence, no.
Yeah, I think that sums it up, man. Nicely done.
Thank you for listening to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. Our guest was Dan, the Sarcastic Barman. You can follow him on Twitter at The Sarcastic Bar, or you can look him up on YouTube, The Sarcastic Barman. If you want any notes for the show, please follow us on Twitter at Somedare Podcast. You can follow me at Brentley SDCIC, and you can also follow Neil at Neil Sanders MC. Once again, thanks for listening. See you next time.